to be legal.
Right. Okay, it's on its way.
Oh, look at that.
So let me find my list.
Right.
Oh.
Okay, it's on its way. All right, so that's YouTube itself. Okay, let's
Okay, so yeah, we're working.
stop that.
Where will?
Oh, you're seeing it on, okay, and you're hearing it? Yeah, I can hear something there.
Yep.
Okay,
So this is how we're gonna stream it to the world and we'll.
yep,
What is this one?
This is for our board members who can't.
That's
come
my-
because there's- Yeah,
So that's in the right meeting.
yep.
There's nobody else.
I'm wondering if the back table, this is only one person.
okay, so is there gonna be like any PowerPoints shown or anything?
Public's not gonna see anything.
Okay, okay.
But they won't need to see a PowerPoint.
And if there's anything at all, it'll be in board docs or something, or, because,
Yes,
because typically there's something like
well,
that.
they'll be, are you asking what we might need to project for the guy who's zooming in?
No, not for him,
Not for him,
For
for
the
the
public.
the
public,
public.
they can see board docs.
Okay, yeah,
I mean, they've got it online. All we're required to do for them, I think, is the audio.
Audio stream.
okay,
Have I got that right?
yeah.
No.
I like to just make things up.
No,
But that's my.
Are we still streaming?
Real understanding.
We should be.
can we stop it for? Or at least mute ourselves so we're not streaming.
Oh,
Okay, but what I was about to say,
Okay.
that wouldn't be okay, that's why.
Well.
okay, let's go out of that. The meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Okay, right now.
You come to a room of all those and each one of us is on one of those.
I know.
So, Brett, for what it's worth, I'm not sure how hard it would be. It looks like you could move it in just few feet, maybe, couple feet. Okay, that's good, that's good. And then we shift it to, white, and then I get Steve. Yeah, good. We're good?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's amazing technology.
This is remarkable.
It's remarkable.
And the camera's spot up top, I see, okay.
That's amazing. So may we begin?
Yeah, please.
I am calling the September 21st retreat of the Lane Community College Board of Education to order. And our first thing that we will do is Ms. Tammy will take the roll.
Rosie Pryor,
Here.
Holly Johnson,
Present.
Angela Van Cross,
Present.
Mike Geister,
Here,
Steve Mattel.
We gotta register.
Lisa Pryor.
Present. And
And-
Austin Fulnady is excused this evening. So, land recognition, do we have someone? Please.
Yes, thank you. We begin our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya.
Thank you, President Golden. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for being here tonight. I think most of us have looked forward to this retreat 2.0. I'm only sorry that two of our members can't be with us in person and one at all. But we will do our best and we will soldier on. And I'm very, very happy to welcome Dr. Cindy Miles, who is joining us in person this time to help us with our retreat, and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Trustee Pryor. And I just want to say, I'll start with a humble thanks for your trust in me, for your devotion to Lane. And I think we need to do a shout out of thanks to Tammy and Brett. It's lots of behind the scenes preparation to put the packet together. Tammy and the technology gurus were in here when I got in before 5 o'clock, putting their hands on and doing magic. So thank you, and convey our thanks as well, if you would. So many thanks all around. There's also thanks that are owed, and if it's all right with everyone, for us to move into first names for this evening, is that comfortable? Is that okay?
Work for me.
I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable. I don't want to be disrespectful of how you've done your business. But I wanted to also say thanks to Stephanie, who helped work with me on developing the agenda for this evening, but especially Rosie and Steve, who helped shape this based on feedback that we got from the retreat in July. I can't believe it's been that long ago. So, you know, it feels like yesterday and 2 years ago at the same time to me. And so we're really conscious and intentional in trying to build on the good work that you did, because you did some great work. And I'll remind you of some of it, and you have the notes in your packet. I hope you had the chance to review and say, we're gonna build on that and start with, I wanted to clarify as we look at the agenda, because I appreciated the feedback that Rosie and Steve gave, because I think you really helped us tighten. You know, I had put a draft together and I had then worked with Stephanie, but what you gave us was a sense of where this board's interest was. And so what you see reflected in this agenda is truly a co-creation. And you'll see it's got 3 primary pieces. Everybody find your agenda in the packet. And I thought, if we'll just look at the papers, I mean, we can certainly project it if you've got the electronic versions, if that's comfortable to you. But in some ways, I feel like just having us more human eye to eye can change the energy and give us a chance to have a different kind of conversation. So I look at our goals over the next 3.5 hours that we have dedicated for this evening. Thank you for dedicating this time. And there's 3 primary objectives that we're aiming for by the end of the evening. And one is for you to come collectively together to articulate your expectations for the college's performance. So everything we're looking at is guiding toward this current academic year, through this trajectory of the 22-23 academic year. So we'll do some work, and you see that in that first piece. That's interesting. Called the vision forward. I shut it away. What do you think? Why not? So we'll focus on that. So coming out of that will be shared expectations for college performance. And then you see a subset of that where we're going to look at the shared commitment. What does it look like for the board to support your new president? So that's part 1. Then we move into part 2, and we're going to be looking for establishing clear collective agreements about board performance. So these are your goals for yourselves. So the first set of goals are goals that you're establishing for the college. So goals for yourself in terms of, we're going to look at your self-evaluation that you did, looking back at last year, look at high performance board indicators, and then have some conversations about some issues and topics that you've raised that you want to come together and solidify and clarify your norms and expectations for one another. So that's part 2. Then we'll retire into executive session, and in that piece, you'll have the opportunity to do an initial formative evaluation of your new president, give her feedback on how she's doing so far, and then from that, be able to help give, and building on the information that came earlier, direction for how her annual performance, what are the expectations, the collective measurements of how you'll be assessing her performance over this year. So that's our big takeaways for the evening. Is there anything else that you want to achieve? Is that good? That's enough. If we do, you'll run over and get cookies when you need energy. All right. So I'm gonna step us right in respect of your time. And I want to start by asking you to, this is the part where we do the 3-hour hold hands and do the look in one another's eyes and counter group for you, Steve, because I know you love that part so much. Not quite. So I will invite you to think of a time when you were especially excited or satisfied to learn something. Just one instant. It could be any time in your life. And maybe it was some breakthrough, something you were struggling with learning that was difficult and you had a breakthrough after a long effort. Maybe it was an aha moment. Maybe it was just something that you learned that gives you great satisfaction. Take a minute, think about it. And then I'm going to ask each of you to briefly share this learning story. And I'd like you to say who was involved in that learning experience and what it meant to you. Make sense? Okay. Give you just a minute to think. And see who might want to go first. Mike's hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think back to my first ACCT meeting. I was very new as a board member, and learning about guided pathways, and I'm a product of the buffet style approach to courses as a college student, and really enjoyed that. But I had the luxury of being able to pay for college by just working in the summertime without having to take out loans, which is totally different now. So when you've got, when money's not an object and you've got all kinds of time on your hands, it's really kind of fun to dabble and take interesting sounding courses. And so when I first started learning about the guided pathways, I was strongly opposed to it, because it seemed to me that this buffet style contributed to my development quite a bit. But when I think about the tremendous expense that families and students have to pay for being so sloppy about the approach to college that I took, I really appreciated and have continued to enjoy the approach of a more focused direction in students taking classes. And so that was a learning experience for me, and one that I think has been valuable to me as a board member.
Thank you. That, I think a lot of us went through that shift in movement to thinking about how this focused, targeted, guided approach, because we had a philosophy in community colleges of let students explore. You know, that we thought was a gift. And then when we started looking at the data, what opened my eyes to it, to your point, was when I heard the data about how many students we were losing because they were either accumulating, you know, aimless sets of credits or just lost along the way. And then the secondary data showing us that it was our students of color who were impacted most severely. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Ready? Go, Lisa.
I'll go to the typically opposite end of the spectrum. So the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, was learning to ride a bicycle. And it's a very dear memory to me because my parents separated or divorced when I was 5, and I didn't get to spend a lot of time with my dad. And I was learning to ride a bike, and so my dad was doing the typical thing. He'd taken the training wheels off and was running alongside the bike to give me confidence, because I didn't have a lot of confidence, and he must have been running alongside the bike for probably half an hour without holding it. And until I finally realized, and you know, he was all out of breath and sweaty, but I was so excited, and it's just a really cherished memory for me because, well, one, my father is no longer with us in this world, and 2, I don't have a lot of clearly articulated memories of my father.
That's very precious. I'm sure he enjoyed every breathless moment alongside you. That's lovely.
But yeah, I think of that excitement as a full body experience. It's a visceral memory.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Ready?
The first thing I thought about it was learning how to navigate through Zoom when COVID hit. And I won't talk about that, getting logged in anyway. But then I thought, and it was when I learned how to fill out the application for federal student aid. It was really enlightening to me, and it has supported me 20-year career. And the people that were involved was a counselor, an advisor, a college advisor. But anyways, just learning how to fill that out was just everything, you know, meant everything. And then now I'm able to help others.
That's beautiful.
That was an intimidating process back then. It was on paper.
Oh,
In
yeah.
paper, so there was no online, and then learning faster on the web was even more exciting. And now being able to complete an application in 9 minutes and help others with that.
That's what a beautiful example of you didn't know what you didn't know. So, you know, Lisa knew bicycles existed. You didn't, this was like bringing brand new opportunity to you. That's very exciting. I remember going to Washington, DC and watching the primary senator who was backing the bill for the streamlining of FAFSA. And he would always make a big show. He would carry this thing and then he would trail it out, and it would be like 12 feet to show you how long and convoluted that thing was. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was thinking of recently, I took up running a few years ago, and I was running at like an 11-minute mile, maybe I'd get close to a 10-minute mile on a good day. And then I started getting a little bit more interested in like running faster because I didn't want to run longer because the joints hurt. And then I found out that it turns out if you reduce your stride length and increase your cadence, it reduces the pressure on your joints and you can run faster. And so it's made such a difference. I run so much faster now, but my miles are between 8:15 and 8:40 usually.
Wow.
And it's not very profound, but it made a really big difference in my every other day life. I think your follow-up questions were who was involved and what it meant. I learned it from social media.
I wondered
didn't
where
believe it
you
at first,
found
but
it.
I tried it. It worked. And what it meant for me is just reduce joint pain so I can run more and hopefully for longer.
I mean, I've never even heard that myself. I mean, it's not, my running days are long over, but I wish I had known.
It's incredible. It's really.
That really is. That really is. And it's counterintuitive.
Mhm.
You know, it feels like you want to, stride.
Yeah.
So
what I
that's a
started with,
beautiful
is
example of
long
counterintuitive learning.
And now they look really choppy and kind of silly, but they look great.
That's very cool. Thank you.
I have one.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very basic, but it's foundational when you move to a new area. And so I learned how to drive to this community college, the Lane Community College, without my navigation system.
That's a compliment. It was a trust ride. I can do it.
It was huge. So my favorite street in the city is Pearl,
Oh,
because I can drive to and navigate to Pearl Street. It's very easy, and I just love that. And so, who was involved? It was my navigation system and me in the car talking about how to get to the college and learning. And it's really meant something huge to me, actually. So I now have an appreciation for what Eugenians think of as traffic in the city, because it has increased, over time since I came in July into now. So, but it's huge. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
I know. I mean, it takes courage, and then we'll automate. And then we get to the point, and I remember you drive automatically when you repeat routes.
Right.
There's studies about this. I had driven by my own house because I'd be so focused on thought, on something, and then wake up and how did I drive and not know where I was? So you have to be very conscious when you're learning new routes.
Yes.
And then don't over automate
And
drive out of college.
And here you must be conscious of turkeys, and you must be conscious of food.
I saw some coming in just now.
You must be conscious of turkeys as well.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And will you? Thank you, Steve.
I kind of boiled it down to two, but I'll make them brief. One sort of ongoing right now, so in my job as the sustainability director at the U of O, one of a big task is to try and figure out what to do to decarbonize the institution, right? So U of O is heated with natural gas. That's the main source of emissions on campus. And we, without getting into too many details, we've identified some options to transition off of natural gas. It's very expensive, it's very complicated, it's very disruptive. And then so that part, I guess I've known for a little while. The thing that's sort of new to me is sort of understanding this thing called the Climate Protection Program. That's a new policy implemented by the state of Oregon just this past January. And it has just enormous implications for what we would need to do ourselves as an institution and what we can expect from the market as a result of the policy. And I have just loved, I am a little embarrassed, I suppose, to say like the hundreds of pages of dry, boring technical reports put out by various agencies and trade organizations and all the rest. That's primarily where I learned it from. And I have just enjoyed dozens of hours I have put into trying to understand that. But I also, I also sort of triangulate by calling people who I know who are experts. I'm thinking this, and what do you think? And, so it's a mix of sources, actual people, which is sort of the fun part, and testing out, the ideas that I think I have based on policy documents I've read. So I thoroughly just enjoyed that process. And then I'll tell a more personal one. My son and I have been learning to sail together. I've known how to sail for a long, long time. He's learning in the last bunch of years. We were leading up to a big trip that we took this past spring break to the Bahamas, where we rented a small boat, a very small boat, on the cheap, and then sailed it, up these deserted chain of islands. You could camp out on and in the islands you want. It was great. It was 6 nights, like 150 miles of sailing, something like that.
Trip.
And it was great. Anyways, and it became clear to me just as that Jason, my son, is the better sailor.
You should say that, Sue.
Experience tells me. So when I sail in the same way that when I, try and understand Spanish. Like I do a one
You have
for
to
one,
translate.
each word one for one in my head, and I sail like that too. Okay, I'm supposed to, I need to come about, and I'm thinking that that's turning around, and
All the
I'm
steps.
thinking about, okay, the wind's coming from here, and then I have to go over there. That's like working it all out in my head, and it takes time. And sometimes you don't have time. Jason just like intuitively knows it, so he's not thinking about the angles and that he has to go to and where the wind's coming from and the currents. It's just all kind of making sense. He thinks in that language. And I could see that at a certain point. And we got ourselves into some trouble at a certain point. And
Sailors always do.
and there was a third person with us, and who also knows a bit, but it was clear Jason knew the most. And I said to everybody, like, Jason's in charge. He knows this the best. Yeah.
Well,
He was very happy.
it's always a point of pride when the next generation is better than we are, thank goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful. He's an intuitive.
Yeah, and he got us out of trouble. Yeah.
How cool. How cool. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much.
I don't know,
Rosie, forgive me.
Okay,
I was best for last.
Yeah, well, I'll share a funny personal one. My sons are Matt and Drew, and they're 40 next month and 38. And when I was in the labor room delivering Drew, Matt was 22 months. And I remember when they put Drew on my tummy after he came out, I remember thinking, well, I can't love him, I love Matthew. How can I love both of them?
Oh, wow.
And then it just faded away,
Wow.
just that quickly. It was such a startling reaction. I'll never forget my first thought when they put Matthew, my first child, on my tummy. I thought, that's a baby.
I remember that.
But I was really surprised to realize that I had an instant of conflict, personal conflict. I thought, oh, how can I? And then it just fades away.
So I guess who was involved with that was you and
A whole cast of characters,
yes.
and including my husband and Matt and Drew.
But it was quick.
Yeah, it was very quick, fleeting. Yeah.
So learning can be,
So it took me a long time to get the courage.
no, go for it, go for it. Learning can be step by step, it can be a struggle, it can be breathless. It can be finding your way, it can be learning things you didn't know. And I appreciate all of your stories. Because I want, obviously, as leaders, as thought leaders, as holding the trust of your learning organization, I encourage you to think about learning every chance you get. That's what's going on. That's what you're here for, is to help build this organization, hold this organization in its fullest trust, so that the best And most important, those who we serve have the best and most meaningful learning experiences. So take it back to what matters. So thank you. Thank you for that. Really appreciate you. So to work. To the outcomes of your learning. So I want to start you, we're looking at our agenda, and I want to spend a little bit of time with you stepping back to the priorities that your new president presented to you just a few days ago at your last September 7th board meeting. So you have that. If you want to look at the document, it's on page 6 of the packet that I sent you, and the packet that Tammy has given you has it in order following the notes from the last board meeting. Everybody find those? Because we may want to look together, look along, look at this together. Because what I want to ask you, I want to walk through this with you, and we have your author with us to answer any questions. But the question before you is, can you own these goals? These are presented to you as the president's strategic priorities for the academic year. And what I'm asking you is, can you validate these? You saw them, you gave a tacit support for them, as I'm understanding, September 7th meeting. You've had time to think about it, chew on it a little bit. You've got them in your packet. So let's go through them and make sure we're all clear, because I want you to make sure they're full and complete, and you can say, yes, this is the strategic agenda that this board is setting for this college for this year. Because that's really what the president is asking you. Okay, so if we look at those, there's 3 components, as you know. So fiscal condition, and what Stephanie is saying she's going to provide for you is she's going to lead the institution, and you'll be a piece of this, in achieving a shared understanding of the fiscal condition of the college. We talked about at the last retreat in September, that even this board doesn't have a collective, there's a split in your opinions about the fiscal health of the college. Some of you may have question marks, some of you think it's very healthy, some of you think it's not. And so for you to be able to have a cohesive step forward in building, deep fiscal long-term plans for this institution, you need to have a collective understanding of your current status. So that's what this is bringing. That's what she's saying she's going to bring to you. So an external consultant's coming. She's putting together an ad hoc fiscal condition task force, doing this work through this fall. It's going to have representation from various constituent groups. So I'm understanding it. Correct me if I'm ever saying anything wrong, because I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. And then validate, so they will be looking at it with the help of this external consultant, and then bring a report back to you in January. All goes well. That says, here's what we learned, here's what we think it is, and here's our recommended plan of action based on what we're saying is the fiscal health of the institution, to give you that strong, consensual baseline. Okay, so that's number 1. And then from that, if things are moving along that pace, that long-term strategy that you see in the middle of the page would be something you could begin to work on. She would be bringing ideas to you about a long-term establishing budget assumptions and priorities that align with whatever fiscal realities you discern and agree upon, the institutional priorities and needs, as well as non-traditional funding streams, new and non-traditional funding streams. So that's that fiscal conditions. It's a pretty big, meaty goal. Questions, thoughts, feedback on this one? Works for me. And perhaps as we go along, we can do this one way or the other. So I'm kind of playing this by ear. Richard's going to go through them all and then come back to you and say, if you're saying yes, then the next piece is, how will you know? This is a goal. So how are you going to evaluate this goal? how are you gonna evaluate progress in this goal over this next year? That should be part of your evaluation that you do at the end of the year. It should be part of your evaluation, in my opinion, of your present. This is what she's saying she's gonna do. You're telling her to do it, so you're gonna, did she do it? So to me, you're not gonna be able to, the metrics don't make sense to me to say, we've got a healthier budget. The metric is, did you do this fiscal analysis? Were we able to achieve consensus in the institution, especially on the board? So it's kind of a process goal, if you will.
It seems, for me, seems fairly straightforward because it's, you know, it's a report essentially that we're being promised in January or so. As a result of a process, which is going to be kicked off now, you know, when we have that report that,
Right.
You know, unless something's gone horribly wrong along the way, we should have a clear or picture of our fiscal health.
Precisely.
So for me, that one's the first part of what the metric is, or how will we know? It's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It's not promising us fiscal health. It's not, you know, that's to come later. It's just, yeah.
It's an assessment of fiscal health that you can all buy, and you can believe. That's the goal, that's the objective, and then from that you can build your, you know, fiscal development plan, whatever that's going to be. So, and it's kind of stating the obvious, but I think it's real important to state the obvious for things like this, because the obvious isn't always obvious. And especially when you're talking about expectation, big picture expectations for the president, for your institution, calibrating is very important. So I appreciate your, you know, letting me walk you through what may seem obvious. But I would bet, yeah.
So first of all, I just want to commend Stephanie on all three of these. I feel like they all reflect some deep listening and observation that started long before she even became president, right? These are all things that we've been discussing for a long time. They're all things we've communicated individually to her.
Okay.
So, with this one, when I read the first section, I feel like that is establishing a goal of cohesive understanding among stakeholders regarding the fiscal condition of the college.
Correct.
And so how will we know that there's a cohesive understanding among stakeholders?
Correct.
And it also says improve transparent, evidence-based communication with stakeholders. So how will we know that communication has been improved with stakeholders? So those are two things I would be asking.
Correct. I think that's excellent. And I would encourage you to remember that you are a stakeholder.
Yes.
You're in fact probably the primary stakeholder of this. Because that's where you're, you know, you're certainly seeking for all constituent groups to be able to buy into whatever this fiscal status is. But I'm imagining how many employees do we have, Elaine?
725.
700. Okay, 7. So I don't think you're gonna get all 725 agreeing. Because nobody ever does 100% agree on everything. But if you can get, you know, primary understanding, acceptance, and to the point that people will trust budget reports, people will trust what we're saying and be able to move from that. You had something, Russ.
One of the things I hope for and why I am so supportive of this approach is this cohesive understanding. I think one of the biggest challenges Lane had experienced in the last 7 or 8 years is a sense of differing stakeholders choosing to interpret facts differently. And so while I see this as a fact-finding project, I think there's going to be a real challenge to, and I hope this board will commit to the work product being the shared understanding. I'm not sure if I can articulate what I'm trying to say. one of the things that has come up, it came up in July when we were retreating about the board being presented differing information, oftentimes quite at the last moment when the board is faced with some kind of decision.
Mhm.
And the very best thing we can do to my way of thinking as a group of policymakers is to say, this is the process whereby we will establish what the fiscal condition of the college is.
Right.
And that work product will be our shared understanding of the college's fiscal condition. And we won't be entertaining a lot of last minute reinterpretations from other stakeholder groups.
Mhm.
The whole purpose of spending this money and taking this time and hiring these experts and giving them access is to be able to do this sort of deep dive diagnostic and present us with an expertly articulated picture of Lane Community College's fiscal condition,
Right.
fiscal
And
situation.
if you don't mind, Rosie, I want to move us a little bit. And I'm not at all trying to stop your discussion about that. I'm just going to say, we're going to have a place a little bit later in the agenda to talk
That
more
works for me.
specifically about, you know, how you want to deal with information that comes to the board. That's different, that we're going to get to that topic. But
That's not where I wanted to go.
Right, good. So it sounds like we're good on this one. And you had a question on your face. Did I misinterpret? I want to make sure. Yes, I want to make sure everybody has the ability to weigh in if I'm missing something. Thanks, Helen. All right, so you know what you're doing with this one. You got thumbs up and you got at least a general sense of how you're going to be monitoring the progress on this goal. Good.
I just want to briefly respond. Please, somebody brought up a good point about how do we know that it's, transparent. It's actually for me, the fact that the report is publicly available is a big step in that direction. Anybody can access and read the final report. And I would guess that the report itself would describe the kinds of thank you, exactly, the people who were consulted.
Exactly. I think it looks to me as I'm reading it in the discussion that I've had with Stephanie is the process itself will be inclusive and transparent to try to get to a transparent and inclusive outcome. That's what I'm understanding. So, and you'll be getting feedback along the way. I'm assuming that you'll hear about how it's going even before January.
I was going to include that because absolutely, any time the board wants a report, I will certainly be happy to provide update reports. And certainly I have weekly communications to the board that I send.
Sure.
And this would be part of that as well. It would be included in my weekly communication. It's kind of an update on the progress.
Okay, great. So I'm just in respect of time, I'm going to move us similarly on the enrollment, looking at bringing external expertise to, in this case, this one's really more trying to, as I'm understanding it, bring it to the internal college constituents who have been dealing with enrollment to take a look at, what have we been doing, what's working, what's not, and questions about, what could be done ideally, what's affecting the enrollment declines, questions about, who's not here and why. What should be our target? How do we, so this is more comprehensive, it's rather operational stuff, but it is vitally important to the institution, but getting a deeper dive on what's the status with our enrollment management system, what can be done, what's working, what are the factors driving, and then coming down.
And I would add that enrollment, of course, is not exclusive of fiscal condition. They're very much intertwined.
Sure.
Very much intertwined. And so we'll see, I'll just share that in the fiscal condition assessment, there will be some consideration of the enrollment system as well.
Makes sense.
Yes, but the enrollment area priority is really about the enrollment system in a comprehensive kind of way. And so, yes, I just wanted to add that.
Well, in a way, what it makes me think is that gives you yet one more triangulation on the enrollment piece that you're going to get from the fiscal work as well. So that's good. They all interlace. It's a system. They all go together.
Stephanie, do you include recruitment in enrollment or
We
is that
will.
separate?
In the system, it will include recruitment. We call it outreach
Mm-hmm.
in some cases, and so it will include that.
Marketing, outreach, whatever
Yeah.
that is, to
Yep.
get people interested in applying.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? What we call, there's not a word that says the whole shebang of how to make it welcoming, how to go for this, and then getting them through the pipeline, through the matriculation process. It goes under this umbrella of enrollment, but it's much more than enrollment.
Okay.
Enrollment's like just signing you up. It's the whole system.
As long as that piece is part of it,
Very.
that's fine, that's good.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of that, I mean, I think that I really like that retention and completion is called out, and I think, when we look at the strength, vulnerabilities and opportunities, we may find we're doing much better with recruitment and enrollment than we are with retention and completion.
Yeah, you never.
And so I really like to have an understanding of all of those things at the end.
Exactly. The old maxim is that, the easiest student to enroll is the one you got.
That's for sure.
So
We're going
it's
to,
comprehensive.
it's very much comprehensive, and one of the things we'll be doing, you may have heard of the secret shopper, you may have heard of that as a tool. And so that will be included in this as well, a secret shopper kind of activity. So that will be pretending that you are a student of various ages, various
Some people have the
backgrounds,
experience and they can report that.
and they can report that.
Good.
Will we look at who's no longer coming to Lane? In other words,
Who was here and did we lose during the enrollment decline? Yes,
The stop outs, we call them stop outs and dropouts, those kinds of folks, we will be looking at them as well.
So to move us, you're saying, I know you're saying yes and validating this goal, then how are you going to evaluate it? So you're going to be looking for the feedback that's going to come from this external consultant with the existing enrollment groups that are going to be involved. And you're going to report in January. And then you'll have the chance at that time to say, does it answer all your questions? It's nice that you're asking these now, and Stephanie knows to be sure to include those. I guarantee you she knows those are included because she knows this stuff. But good, excellent. Okay, number 3 is a little more amorphous, because when you're talking, it's about institutional culture, which is a big, complex topic. And I'm gonna just start by saying, I've been a student of org culture for a long time. I did doctoral research in this topic. I did, study. It's something I'm a great fan and student of organizational culture. Organizational culture is a very complex thing that doesn't change quickly. If you're talking about the real culture of an organization, when we're teaching org culture, we always draw an iceberg. And we always say, here's the water line, where you see, 1/10 of it above the water line. And that's what you see. But the culture is that huge mountain below the water. And unseen, deeply held beliefs, values, behaviors, norms, expectations in the institution comprise the culture. And what I would, just a little quick, mini riff on org culture, you don't have an organizational culture at Lane. Culture is always multifaceted. You may have some overarching indications of what this all compiles, but you've got subcultures. You're going to have, the subculture of faculty, subculture of students, subculture of different employee groups, subculture of, you can cut and by this, people who've been here a long time, newcomers to the organizations. Those are various kinds of subcultures. There have been lots of research where even within academic institutions, where they look at the subculture of full-time faculty versus of part-time faculty, blah, blah, blah. So what are you after with this look at organizational culture? I would argue that what I'm hearing from you, from the individual conversations and the discussion you had in July, and what I'm seeing here, you're wanting a healthy, vital organization, a place that's healthy to work and learn. Ideally, you want this to be a healthy place for students to meet their highest goals. They feel a sense of belonging and welcome and engagement, and you want that for your employees as well. Am I right? In a big, I mean, that's like mom and apple pie, of course. Now, you're using data from the language is important. It's a climate survey. It's not a culture survey. Climate is a point in time. It's a picture, a snapshot of how whoever answered your survey was feeling at that time, as it relates to a variety of indicators about belonging, how things work around here. Is it welcoming? Is it inclusive? Generally, those kinds of things. So that's just kind of background for you to plant in the back of your mind. It's very important. So you're going to be, what Stephanie's proposing is that she's going to take the results from this climate survey that was done. When was it done?
May or March?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Just this spring?
Just this spring.
Memorial Day, end of May.
Okay, okay, so it's recent. And bring those results, make them public and say, here's what we found. Good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. How does this feel? And the focus group, courageous conversation through the institution, because that's just one piece of data. It depends on who was there and what was going on. What was going on in the weather that day? What was going on? I don't know if there were labor contracts that were in play at that time. That often impacts responses to climate surveys. What's going on in the economy, what's going on in people's lives, what's going on with, COVID, all those sorts of things have an impact on results that you get from climate surveys. So you're going to have these courageous conversations so that you get further data. It's like focus groups almost, to get a sensibility of who didn't answer and what might you have to say about this conversation. And then this sense of what can we do to make things more inclusive and welcoming for employees and students. So all these steps that you've got here, taking it out, conversations, getting a preliminary plan of action in the spring, asking your departments and divisions to come up with their own action plans based on the plan and the information and what's going on with the discussions. This is really courageous. This is wonderful, in my opinion, to take this boldly, because there's going to be, things that aren't as positive, I'm sure. I haven't looked at it, but that's how it always is. And say, how can we improve? What's good that we want to expand, and how can we improve? So all that will be going on. So I'm kind of going on this because this is a long journey. Making change and influencing organizational culture is always a long journey. So you'll want to think about, from a board perspective, what will make you feel good about hearing along the way. Monitoring this one will be trickier than some of the others, but you'll get, the action plan. You'll get to see, does this make sense? And then the departmental plans that are anticipated to start being implemented in the fall. And then formative results will come back to you in January. So they've got some ideas. We're going to see kind of how it's going. And then repeat the survey, the climate survey, in spring of 24, because it takes a while for these things to make a difference. So this is one, if I'm not contradicting it, to me, it takes, I think it requires some patience, but having long-term, keep your eye on the prize with this is what I would say. Yes.
Kind of a general comment really about all three. I think that's the case with all three, right?
That's probably true.
Our enrollment.
It's not going to change overnight.
In some ways,
That's very
honestly, like this is the easy year because it's mostly about doing assessments of where are we at with our physical condition, what does our enrollment management plans currently look like, and we'll get action plan and recommendations or whatever for those. My expectation essentially for any goals taken on by the president of an institution is that they're long-term goals, right? We have a clear set of tasks for this year.
Yeah.
But strategic goals like that are not the kinds of things that, wrap up a year later. So this year, the focus is on, a bunch of data collections that would lead into action plans or recommendations. And, so the long-term success is part of that is the stick-to-itiveness.
It really is.
To
It's
those-
keeping
Okay,
the
We
focus.
we figured out what the dirty laundry, whatever the problems were. That was easy, relatively speaking. Now what is, is where we really will see.
Exactly. And Mike, we don't want to leave you out of the conversation. Are you feeling?
I'm good.
You're good? Okay, pipe up, please, make sure we're including you. Yes, Lisa.
So yeah, I agree with Steve, like, I think a big part of this, this third goal is that we have to make the commitment to doing this work and like really sticking with it. But we may also find that we need to be flexible in how we navigate it, if it's going to, be over a period of time. The questions I have when we say courageous conversation.
Yes.
That's something that's quite specific to some people, thinking about singleton's work. Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about a more amorphous type of courageous conversation?
I think we're really thinking about it in a couple of different ways. One is a more formal way with facilitated focus groups. And the other is having the departments facilitate conversations. So that would not be an external professional facilitation, but leaders of those departments having some conversations. And many of those would be courageous conversations about what's working well in their departments, what's not working well in their departments. So those two pieces of data, I think, will be used to construct ways that we can create a more welcoming kind of environment, an environment that diversity, equity, and inclusion are really included in this. Not explicitly spelled out here, perhaps, but this is where diversity, equity, and inclusion in part falls, because we settled on purpose, order, and caring as those three areas that we really want to make sure that we focus on. And the cabinet had a chance to talk about purpose, order, and caring, what those meant. So order is about operational efficiency, purpose is about focus and strategic direction, and then caring really is about belonging. And so we really are touching the diversity, equity, and inclusion as we're doing this kind of work.
Yeah, that is a really important component to me, because I don't see that articulated in this description. That I'm not assuming it's not included.
Right.
But when we talk about institutional culture, where there's a dominant culture here. And then there are communities of people that feel more marginalized. Right. And how we address that, both within the here and now, the time of the clock or the time, or however where we are exactly right now, but also looking at the history and also looking at moving forward is really important. And when we talk about dominant culture, I think people often assume we're talking about race or culture, cultural diversity, but there's also implications there, I think, around gender that are significant, and also around relationships of power as relate to who's in charge. Right. So I would hope, like, when we're doing this, that we're sensitive when people are talking about what is working for them in a workplace environment. If they're having to speak about that with their supervisor, their most direct supervising individual, they may not feel safe.
Sure.
So just like I hope we would create situations where BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx communities have a safe space to talk together in a safe way.
Excellent. So the question then I have for you is, are you comfortable having these three key priorities be the board's priorities for the college for the year? Is there anything missing?
Not for me, I'm good. That seems like a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. But I think it's just important to validate. Obviously, it was included in your packet. We don't need to go over because you've spent time on your strategic, strategic plan work is going to continue. There's gobs of other work that's continuing. But what you're saying is these are the top three. This is what's most important to us as a board. That our president focuses on and the institution focuses on this year. We think this is where we're going to make the biggest difference in the quality of life and in the health of this institution.
And these are the president's goals and priorities as well, correct?
Yes, they are, but I'm asking you to take them as your goals. And if you don't want to do that, you need to say so. You've had a different process for your goal setting for the year in the past, where you had 26 goals. Look down.
We've been ambitious.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
so we're
this is a focus.
additional goals now.
Different
We
world.
are also gonna talk about board.
Yeah, there'll be some different things with boards. So,
I'm fully supportive. I think this is great.
Okay.
I think it wholeheartedly reflects the.
Fantastic.
So I'm really supportive of these as well. The only curiosity I have is when January and beyond comes. If this board will be able, how we can ensure that our focus is on the policy implication
Mhm.
for the college, and that we're not diving down into operational issues related to culture. I mean, I sit here thinking about, gee, our managers getting the training they want. That's not a policy issue. That's
It's
an
not.
administrative issue.
Those are some of the
And I-
gifts that you.
And so I think it will be a challenge to address our attention to these goals from a policy setting perspective.
It's very important, Rosie. That's a great underscore. And that'll be your own calibration, you as chair will help lead that, keeping you at that level. It's tempting to get in there because you've all got a lot of experience, many of you in institutions pirate or other parallel organizations that you could grow from. It to me is a matter of you're building trust along the way, that your president is moving the operations to a satisfactory level. So that's why you want to think about, that's why I'm pushing this. How will you, how are you going to evaluate progress on these goals? So keeping it at that high level that will keep you on the policy side of the discussion will be important. Okay, well done. A breath and a shift in focus. We started with the president's priorities. Now I want you to shift to thinking about the transition, what some of you talked about in previous language, supporting the transition with your new president. So this is our item 2 in this first section. And what I want you to, what I would invite you to do is in your little pairs, have a quick conversation. You can do this in, 5 or 8 minutes, I'm sure you can, and come up with 1 to 3 ideas about what would supporting your president's success look like in action. What does the board need to do? What are your ideas about what you as trustees individually and collectively should do to make your new president successful in her transition to this role? And you guys can talk in your pairs and write on your little flip charts there. You've got pens. If you just come up with one idea, that's fine. 1, 2, 3. And Mike, Lisa's coming with the flip chart to a Zoom screen here. Sorry. Is it, what you're up to?
Got it.
Okay, Mike, I'm gonna check in with you in 6 minutes. Go. Really think fast. Okay, let's start with your help.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want me to call in my phone? We're gonna need to put this on mute.
we have signaled that. So one thing is just go to meetings, but let's. Money. So, it's a meeting. And already you see my reason, what you. Sort of this.
Because we would have to then be right now with this.
Thank you for your help.
First, like, we-
Thank you. Thanks for everything.
Okay, well, you might be critical about something I haven't. Yeah. Rather than deal with it.
I guess lunch is.
You can deal with it one-on-one with her and then- You're one. I didn't say that very long, no, rather than dealing with it. Deal with it one-on-one.
It's just maybe not.
And we.
Thank you.
The wording of this, but along the lines of like, careful not to distract from the priority. Yeah, we give them priorities or we endorse them and all that. So for us to say, I'm going to people out. What about, you know, they, you know, get a Mercury that, and then what really you should do, like, is distract the big button.
It's like him to know how much. Picture of them all.
I know they. They get a lot of mine and need stuff.
Yeah.
Demonstrating our own stuff.
Okay.
I wait, like.
All critical neighbor privacy. Raise your hand if you want. Yeah, I think that's one of the.
Yeah, all right. Excellent.
Give her a chance.
Like he's talking, she's, I get it. Because we're watching his lips moving, and she's writing, it's like magic. Okay. So when I'm in the G is going to have an fork and then stick my finger in it. Okay, we're talking about this. How about go? Just about done? Oh, sorry, take your time. So we're going to do some. Yeah, thoughts. Yeah, I think, I know, we need to make it last. It's. My priorities. What do you call that?
Divination, elections.
Oh.
What I, you know, having I don't. Yeah. You know, when you got there, there's some. And. They're not.
Technology.
It's working. It's working. Does have this kind of meeting. It's probably a path. If there's, you can tell there's, yeah, there's engagement, which is really nice. It is. Just take.
Trying to reorient around outcomes. It's not easy to measure.
So I'm gonna say goodbye.
Okay, we about done? Oh, my goodness, look at this.
Yeah, David.
Overachievers, I love it. I love it. And I just have to get up and move. I can't sit anymore, so do what you need to. All right, so let's go team by team and share. Whose mouth isn't full? That's the tricky part. Do you mind? Okay, thank you.
I have a handwriting, you had the idea. So,
I'll bet it's more than that.
number one in progress, already introducing agriculture for folks in the community.
Wonderful.
Number two, importantly, funding her priorities.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because that's one of the levers that we as a board have, right? Like we're budget and policy, so we can fund it and we can write policies and support. So that's like the ability.
And when, if I may, when you're talking about that, you're talking about these three priorities
Yeah.
that are established. Okay.
And just think
Not
about
just-
that for a moment longer, maybe that wasn't precisely the right set of words.
No.
Maybe I would have said like, make sure she has the resources. It's not
Get it.
exclusively about the money, you know.
Yeah, because it's more than money, but yeah, well, but like you say, you set the policy and resource stage for the priorities that you're supporting. Got it. Okay.
Staying focused on priorities, not going off and chasing new shiny objects.
Okay.
For me.
What was that? What movie was it? It was Squirrel.
Yeah.
I know.
And then, I am sharing your ideas, please. The testing, culture, and doing this very successful, not something to micromanage.
Lovely. Lovely. I'm seeing smiles. It's feeling good. It's feeling good. Can we just go around the room?
Sure.
Thank you.
You see me, Mike? So the first group, kind of falls, I think, on maybe under culture or climate, right? So it's kind of multifaceted, so positive and open communication. Reinforce things that are working, notice what's working.
Nice.
Being empathetic, putting ourselves in the shoes of somebody who's coming into a new environment, into a new position. Express appreciation. So, you know, kind of thinking about the type of culture we have on the board and engaging with our president. Support the president in building the team she wants to be successful, right? And so we have had some changes, and I think we can look at that as an opportunity, right? So having an opportunity mindset, being open to new ideas, new ways of viewing things, to learning, like we talked about earlier.
Beautiful.
And then similar, helping Stephanie to connect to the community.
Lovely. It strikes me, and I think we should go back and applaud for one. We didn't applaud your good work because it really is thoughtful. I like that you take a slightly different perspective, but equally valuable. And as I'm thinking, we'll applaud
My first stop.
And what I see it's fascinating. Some of what's inherent in what you're saying is almost modeling as a board, the culture you're trying to promote in the organization. I'm seeing you say, yes, that's what I feel in some of what you're saying. And then remember what it's like to be new. And the one sometimes where I know I've been guilty of is reinforcing what's working. You know, we're sometimes as problem solvers and leaders, we're so quick to go, what needs to be fixed? What's wrong? I've got to do this. What's the next thing to go to? Instead of going, whoa, you know, that was a great meeting. That went well. Solving that, you know, those people feel better. Thank you.
Right, when we do those deep dives of assessment, like I want to know what's working well.
Yes.
In addition to what are opportunities.
Exactly. That's that appreciative inquiry approach. What's going well around here that we want to magnify and expand? Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Pair number 3.
Okay, so being supportive in public meetings, similar to if you have staff member, you be supportive, and then if there was any constructive criticism or something that you had to give, you do it in private and hold those for maybe private conversations that we're having on our one-on-one meetings with the president. Ensure president gets adequate downtime for personal reflection, relaxation, rejuvenation.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have been hearing about really early and really late emails, just saying.
I have some work to do in this area.
So as her collective boss, she may need a little bit of support in that arena. Exactly. Beautiful, beautiful. I like that this one picks up on the more personal side of it, and the classic praise in public, critique in private. You know, we know that's always good management leadership strategy. Anything missing that you asked for in terms of support? How does this feel to you, Stephanie?
Oh, I am so thrilled.
Do you feel like Christmas?
Supported, as a result of these, and so thank you. I really do appreciate this. I guess the only one that I might even add is just an ask of to be supportive of me is, I would want to be able to send the board information, comes from OCCA, for example, and to allow the board to be able to follow along to, and I'd like for the board to please commit to reading that. There are opportunities for training, board training that occurs here in the state. I just found it so useful, that OCCA training that happened. I don't know.
That was just this last weekend.
It was just this last weekend, the one in Independence. It was very, very informative.
And who all participated?
It was the OCCA, and so there's the.
But I mean, of our.
Austin Fonegi attended. It was a one-day board training, and it was Austin Fonegi who attended that. And you saw board members, so it's a really great networking opportunity. Probably some of you may have done this.
Yeah, I was going to say, have others participated? Some of you have been on the board.
Enjoy it?
Yes, and
Yes, I think Mike, yes.
I think also the feedback I gave them in the past was they often had it during the weekdays and during work time. You know, the feedback that I gave them was, you know, that it would be helpful for it to be on a weekend, and they did have.
Oh, so they did it to make it reflect.
They did have it on a weekend this year, so.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
It's very informative for board members, so we have a sense of how the legislative process works. We have a sense of what the levers are in our funding mechanism. From our taxes and all of it. It's just so useful. And when you are hearing that, and hearing the questions from other board members, it just takes I just think it catapults, your awareness of being a board member, so.
Actually, no, thank you. I appreciate that. It's certainly something, we always had our statewide trustee, triple CT, and then the ACCT, and they were invaluable, and they learned, sometimes it was misery loves company, other trustees saying, oh yeah, we're dealing with that too. So there's validation in it. But I did find that our trustees came away with, new perspectives, deeper sense of the roles, and, maybe just more confidence in the job. So, okay, fair. I meant to say earlier, I had, Austin was not able to come due to family commitments tonight, but I had a great conversation with him this morning and went through the agenda, and I got his feedback and I took notes. And so on each of these topics, I want to make sure we're including Austin's voice in this. And he, stepping back to the board's owning the president's goals, we went through it all with him, and he gave a very positive on that one and said, it's important to have good check-ins along the way. So that getting feedback was the thing he was looking for there. And as it pertains to this notion of support for your new president, he mentioned making coaching resources and mentoring resources available. And I can't read my writing on this other one. Oh, I think that was just a subset of that, coaching and mentoring. So that was something he added to the equation that we can put on the list as well. Okay. So I'll, with Terry's help, I'll be compiling all of this, and you'll get your report back. And then this is something that you can refresh throughout the year, use whenever you're doing your follow-ups and your evals. So great work. We're feeling good about it, because what I'm hearing is, significant, and we'll talk later about, more specifics with evaluation, but you're going to be holding her very accountable, but you're also going to be giving strong support is what I'm hearing. And here's the how of each of those. Okay. Ready to shift. Let's now move to board performance and start by looking at where I would invite you to start is just taking a look at that front page of that ACCT article that says Trustee 101. It's page 12. There's an article that we included in your packet, if you've got that. And it looks like this, if you're pulling it up, and you can, the article just goes on. It's it's 2016, but I think, these are fundamentals. It's nothing new. It's nothing that you haven't heard. You've had when you went through your orientation, even if you hadn't gone to the OCCA, and I got the initials correct, training, you've heard this. But I'd like to review these collectively, these 9 principles that are on here. And so maybe if we can just go around the room and everybody read one until we read them all, just to get voices in the room. And I'm not
the actual principle.
Yeah, just the 9 principles.
Okay.
On that first amendment.
Acts as a unit.
Thank you. Number 2.
Represent the common good.
Set policy direction for the college.
Mike, you're actually next.
Yes, well, you're gonna have to pass me on because I've got so many documents I was picking through that.
Sorry, no problem. I just want
Okay, so Steve will read for you.
employ, support, and evaluate the college's chief executive.
Okay, we're just talking about all that.
Number 5, define policy standards for college operations.
Number 6,
Uh-huh.
monitor institutional performance.
Create a positive college climate.
Sorry, I'm taking notes as well.
Monitor 3 things at once.
You're on number 8.
Thank you. Support and advocate the interests of the institution.
And then last, lead as a thoughtful, informed team.
Thank you. No breakthrough.
No changes since 2016.
Yeah, I know. This was documented in 2016. And what's interesting, is if you look at your own board policies and, you know, we won't take the time because we're so limited on time. When you look at your own board policies, there's one that is the job description of the board. And then there's another that's, you know, the ethical standards, expectations for the board. You'll see these same exact things, because these are fundamentals. It doesn't matter where you go, you're going to run into, these are the fundamentals that everyone teaches about, you know, about trusteeship. We talked about several of them already today. You know, we were talking about the setting the policy direction, and, you know, you just got through talking about what you're going to do to employ and support the CEO. Rosie, you were talking about, we need to remember to stay at the policy level when we get this feedback that's coming back to us about the fiscal health and about the climate, the culture of the institution, and about the enrollment circumstances. Monitor institutional performance. That's what I'm asking you when I say, how do you know? How are you going? What are the metrics by which you're going to measure the progress with these goals? And I'm going to ask that question again for your own board performance goals. And I'm going to ask that question again when we talk about your indicators for evaluating Stephanie at the end of the year. The positive college climate. You know, that's one of your big priorities. Isn't that interesting that it says create? It's asking, this set of guidelines is asking the board to create the positive college climate. Does that feel like a big weight on your shoulders? It should.
No, but it feels a little operational to me. Help me understand the board role in creating that.
Right, because you set the expectations, the apex expectations of what this institution is going to value. They're using climate. I always say culture is really more what we're talking about. Climate is that point in time, but within the confines of whenever you're measuring it, what are the values of the institution undergird? So you set those values through your policy direction. You set values every time you make budget decisions. How you interact with one another, and we're about to have a discussion about your decision-making process. How you undertake your decision-making process sends a message, sets a standard, models the culture and climate of the organization. It's like you're the parents, you know, you set the culture for the family. So I find it interesting that they go so far as to say the board's responsibility is to create it. That's a lot. I think you can definitely influence it. I think you want to take responsibility for making it as positive as you can within your capability. There's certainly lots of other factors affecting the organizational culture, but paying attention to it, caring about it, modeling, I think goes a long way. Goes a long way. Support and advocate the interests, blah, blah, blah. And this lead as a thoughtful, informed team is a place we'll come back to. It through this is make your collective decision-making coming to. If you don't have to agree, but you do have to come to decisions, and you have to come to a place where you can act as a whole. You know, that's to meet the ideal exemplary high-performing board.
Can I just add something?
Please.
Cindy, you know, the Lane Community College is all colleges, community colleges have a set of values, excellence, innovation, integrity, those kinds of things. The board, it starts with the board. Because if the board models that, then you allow the institution, you allow us, for example, if that value, one of the values is innovation, you allow us to take risks. But if you don't, then it makes it very difficult for me to encourage the institution to take risks when they know that the board is not going to.
I'm gonna go one step deeper with that, because those words are like, oh, of course we want innovation. Of course we promote risk taking. When you translate that to action, it means if she let's just use the fiscal help as, yeah, as an example. So let's say it doesn't work out. You know, she's got this external expert. You've got this task force. Not everybody's in agreement on the task force. That's the plan. Because it's, you know, complicated, multiple perspectives, multiple constituencies, all of that. With all good intents, what are you going to do if somehow the task force breaks down or if they can't come to agreement? What happens then? There's your scenario. You know, all good faith, did the best she could to go and get the best consultant, you know, based on the references and what she can have. Yeah.
Is this a rhetorical question? Or
It's a scenario question. It's a scenario for you to wrestle with the moment. So it's really not rhetorical. It's
is
kind of,
another way that we would commend the efforts and ask for plan B? You know, this hasn't worked out. It was a great idea. We appreciate all of the effort that went into the idea. What are we gonna do next? What's our next idea?
So a variation on a theme, one of the things I think is even more in our purview, something I think we're doing really well as a group of people who are the land board. There are other institutional boards in our county that are at odds with each other, that have had some really serious at odds with each other issues.
I see, combative.
We're a
Argument
real
and that kind of
disparate
thing.
group of people from my perspective. I mean, we are coming from all walks of life and, but I feel like we work well together without even a lot of time to form much of a relationship with each other because of the pandemic and so forth.
Right.
And we have had differing points of view emerge
Mhm.
in our discussions of things. And we deal with it, and we seem to deal with it in a reasonably positive way, without awful repercussions, and we keep moving forward. So, I mean, in terms of setting the tone or being the parents that model the behavior
Mhm.
that sort of sets the tone,
Mhm.
I think that's one way this group of people does really pretty darn well.
Yes.
So in response to your scenario, you know, I think, yes, what Rosie said, that would, you know, be really important for this board to continue to do those things. And, but I think also, you know, some of the other things that we discussed being, you know, looking for opportunities, being willing to learn, right? One of the metrics of a good board is that we educate ourselves, we continue to grow and learn.
Right.
But you know, I actually think we've experienced that scenario as a board.
Wow.
And, you know, you have to reflect on where you know, the conflict could be or where the miscommunication can be, and you have to reset and find ways to move forward as a community, right? And sometimes that means us making a decision as a board in collaboration with the president, and sometimes it means finding common ground, and sometimes maybe it means starting over.
Mhm.
And seeing what we can learn from that, from the process that we had. So, but, you know, when I think about our world in the present time, like we often see things so polarized, right? And so really, we have more agreement and more in common as a board and as a community here at the college, because we're all deeply committed to the success of this institution and to the students who go here, right?
It's been clear to me, Lisa,
Yeah.
as I've talked with you individually, I mean, that, I would, testify, blood oath, I know that to be true. I know that to be true.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your, running down that path with me, because sometimes, it's easy to, because you believe it and you want to, but in the moment, what could be a failure, if this were, and I don't anticipate it at all. I don't know if it makes you comfortable for me to even run that scenario, because it's not gonna happen. I don't believe it'll happen, because I believe you're gonna take all the steps and, be monitoring those cracks, if there's any cracks in it along the way. I know I've seen your work enough to realize that, but knowing that, and that was a pretty extreme example, but to allow and honor and then say, okay, we like to say, what's plan B? I think it's important to ask good questions. One of the biggest jobs you can do as a board is ask really good questions. Not so much tell them what to do as ask honest, open questions that illuminate understanding and lead you toward consensus. So if you have your mind made up, sometimes you will without knowing it, because that's what the neuroscientists told us, is that we all make snap judgments and make up our mind and then look for evidence to support it. That's what humans do. So we have to guard against that all the time. So if you're moving, you got to learn to take a breath and go, okay, wait. What's not the argument, or this is what we need to do? What's the question I should be asking? And obviously in this scenario is why? Can you help us understand? Where did we go awry? And then what can we do? What's our plan B? Blah, blah, blah. But thinking about asking better questions. Anyway, okay. Back to, I think that's real important though. And thank you for plowing down into those principles, because they're so obvious that we forget them. They're so, yeah, of course, this is what we're supposed to do. We think we do it. How do you know? How do you know you're meeting these? That's the question I would ask of you. And that's what I would encourage you to figure out how to build into your next self-evaluation, which is the segue I want to take to your current evaluation to look at it with you. So if you're looking on page 1720, your packet, or your next item in your folder that Tammy has prepared for you.
The self-evaluation they talk about right now.
Yeah, I'm talking about the board self-evaluation, and it in the packet starts on page 17. It says Lane Community College Board Self-Evaluation Form 2021-22. So this was you did this in the spring, late spring, as I'm understanding it, maybe May, like something like that. Taking a look at the year before. So that's always interesting. And I spent some time preparing for this, really reading and thinking, and I actually did, I calculated your averages. And just to cut to the chase, my observation is that this isn't very useful. It's not very useful data. There are a few nuggets in here. And I'd love for you to tell me if you have a different opinion about it, about the usefulness, the feedback that it gives you in terms, and a board self-evaluation is supposed to help you get better. Help you say, hey, here's what's going well. Here's a little place we need to look at next year. No board is perfect. No president is perfect. No institution is perfect. And I don't see a whole lot of anything except, first of all, the scale, there's no real middle. 3, 4, and 5 are all agreed. Somewhat agree, and strongly agree. There were no disagrees. And all of these, I did some work in psychometrics. So all of these are positively skewed. In other words, they don't flip them and ask the question in the negative. So higher numbers are always better in this, on this survey. no one, six trustees answered this. No one for any of these, however many, it's fairly long. Did you say you didn't do well? None. So it's very positively skewed, number one. And so if you look at a 4 is agree and a 5 is strongly agree. And then you have a somewhat agree, even, that you could have had below that. There were only 3 that had an average of a 4.0, which is just agree. Everything was agree. The majority of the responses were strongly agree. They skewed on the strongly agree side. Now, the other thing I would say about this form, this process, that where it could be improved is to align it with your expectations of yourself. Some of it's here, but it doesn't, I can't see how this maps across. It doesn't map back to your job description. It doesn't map back to your goals for the year. It doesn't map back to what we just looked at as the principles of boardsmanship. So I would map it back to what you agree upon as the standards you're aiming at. And I think it could do a better job of that. Places where your responses indicate you were the highest were in your board education. Your overall average there was a 4.3. And the 2 highest answers of all, new members get the orientation and the board periodically evaluates itself. They're 2 highest responses. So that's, there's a seeming sense of, yeah, we're paying attention to that. Even though your new president was just saying it would be good to look at some other kinds of, training and learning opportunities for the board. So I find that interesting. The second highest was, I think, valid, and something you've been saying to me and I picked up on collectively and individually. This under the board CEO relations, they're not numbered, so it's hard for me to point you to them. But a climate of mutual trust and respect exists between the board and CEO. That was a 4.5. So that was the second highest response. And I think that is valid in the sense of this board is working hard on board CEO relations. That's what I read in this. You're very purposeful, intentional about it through the search process, and then how you are onboarding the new president and making, taking responsibility for that. The areas in which your responses were the lowest were not that low because they were still skewed to the agree, were average of 4, which is an agree on the board organization, the policy role, the community relations. And the one where your responses indicated were the lowest was in advocating for the college. And especially, it says the board works to secure adequate public funding. So you came in at a 4 on that one. The one about working on foundation and fundraising was the lowest. And that hasn't been a high priority, or maybe you haven't been invited, maybe you haven't been engaged in that work.
Hasn't been focused.
It hasn't been.
It hasn't been a focus.
It hasn't been a focus. And it may be, COVID, what's going on, who knows what was going on with fundraising. So it might be a product of the time. So anyway, I don't know that it was that valuable.
So a couple of observations for what it's worth. Clearly this evaluation is in the context of the previous administration, so it's
That's
predated.
true. That's true.
From the get-go. And then in addition to that, I don't know if this is the instrument, I just don't recall, but we had talked about the time that the board filled this out, that there has historically been an approach to board evaluation sponsored by ACCT nationally, and they brought it to Oregon about at this point maybe five years ago, because you probably never, Mike, you never participated in it, I don't think.
I did.
Did you? Okay. Where we were completing an instrument in unison with college boards all over the country, and so
Interesting.
not only did we have an opportunity to see where our own board members were in agreement and in disagreement about things. But we could see how our ratings matched up with the ratings of other college boards around
wow.
the country. So, you know, it's one thing doing, but how are we doing compared to what was sort of the opportunity that existed in that process? And so OCCA brought that back a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago. We all went over to Salishan for the whatever function, and they were doing this process, and we were getting the results in that meeting. And so Austin had volunteered to go back to OCCA and find out if they were prepared to resume that, invest in that, whatever it is that it would take to bring that back. So, but I just would like to say, I really do appreciate what you're saying about the board evaluation should map to these now 3 priorities we've said we have. And there's nothing like that in this particular type of
It would
instrument.
have to be customized
Yeah.
at the institutional level.
So I mean, I having been on the board now, this is my 11th or 12th time to fill something out. I mean, there are members of previous boards who said, I just won't fill it out because it's worthless. I think it's a useless instrument. I don't like it. I mean, I don't know if we're on the board with Tony McCallum, but he hated it. He didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Oh, golly.
So, yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
I can empathize with your,
Yeah, and I don't mean to, cast any shade on,
I'll cast the shade on myself. I'm the Tony McCallum of this board. I didn't do it.
I didn't hear it.
I didn't do it. I don't find any value in it.
But okay,
I'm the one who didn't fill it out.
did you
but-
think it was worthless?
Yeah.
Is that why?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
okay, well, that's.
Well, I
that's
appreciate
helpful.
your
That's helpful
candor.
feedback. It's okay. And yes,
I actually, I believe this predates March, right?
Oh, yeah, I think
This,
so.
this has like been around for a very long
Yeah.
time.
opportunity.
Yeah.
That's our perfect thing. We just talked about earlier.
Right.
Creating an environment for risk taking and change.
And
Here you
I
are.
will say, like, I brought up wanting to use a different instrument.
Uh-huh.
But then the question became, who's going to do that,
Yeah.
right? And, it was right as we were starting
Yeah.
the new president search,
Yeah.
and we had more than our fair
You
share.
had
of
enough on
things
your
to
plate.
do.
You had enough on your plate. So
Right,
I don't think we need to, go too far with this, and beat it to death. There seems to be a sense of there's improvement that we could do. And my recommendation to you is rewrite it. I'm happy to help if that's something down the line, but align it with the priorities that you establish for yourself.
I'm willing to work on that.
And it can be shorter and can be simpler. But try to figure out what would be meaningful. I recommend you get Angela's. Because Angela's one that didn't find value in it. I know, don't you hate that? You're like, oh man, don't say anything. But you bring a nice perspective because, you looked at it and like, oh. So you could help craft items anyway. So just because time is short, I want to move us on. I mean, there was a little bit in your feedback, but where you had some cohesion, it's nothing that's that new. We picked it up in other sources through our conversations, and so I don't want to spend our time on it. Austin said, it's all over the map, was his response about it. So given that, to bring us to a place, what I would want you to look at, then I think to guide your discussion and guide your goal setting, that will then guide your evaluation, is if you look at there's a page that's looks like this, the trustee topics of inquiry on your packet. It's page 21, but it looks like this chart wherever it shows up in your paperwork. And this is, there's the pretty colored version. What this one is a combination of my notes and Rosie's notes from the July retreat and the topics that you raised then. And I categorized them so that we would address them in this workshop, in this retreat. And so for everybody, we're good? Mike, are
Cindy,
you?
I'm not, I don't have the packet, I've got 4 or 5 emails with.
Okay, so look in. Was that in the first? Yes, I didn't remember. Look, the first email that Tammy sent, and it should say trust, the name of that file, Mike, is trustee topics, and topics was misspelled, I noticed that. X agenda, meaning trustee topics mapped with the agenda. See if you can find that. And while he's finding it, you take a look at it and you'll see, you know, we talked about that first row. We talked about, you know, the 3 sets of goals that I'm inviting you to work on. The second row, September 7th board meeting, president's priorities, we've addressed that. So all of these items were topics that you raised. They were responded to in the president's priorities and your validation of your strategic agenda for the year. So we've done row 1 and 2, and we're on row 3. And I want to see if Mike can find the file. Are you online? We might be able to just email it to you.
That'd be great.
Tammy's going to email it to you now.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry for that. Not having it all together. No, don't worry. She'll email it to you. If you don't mind, we'll verbalize this so you can join in the thinking and discussion.
Great.
Because what we're talking about now is for you to have a discussion about your shared expectations for board norms and behaviors to model these exemplary practices that we just talked about. You know, those, you know, if you're going to buy into those 9, they're pretty fundamental. We can, you know, it'll be written up. You can decide that. I don't want to spend the time for you to nitpick those right now, but they're kind of standard. You can look at it. How do you translate that to action? And there's 2 areas that came up in the topics that you raised in the September retreat part 1 that need a little bit of your discussion. And the first one is we've got the how will the board work together. I think we've talked through that piece. This item on board decision making. And the feedback that we heard from you was how decisions are made needs to be discussed and clarified. And then the other feedback that we got is how can the board be even more transparent about how decisions are made? So being clear about how decisions are made, and then secondarily, an assumption built into this statement is you do aim for transparency in your decision making, but how could you be even more transparent? So first of all, help me understand what this is about, because some of you raise this as a topic that needs discussion. What do you mean by this? What do you think? Maybe you wrote this, maybe you said this. What do you think this means as it pertains to your board? Is there a question among you about how decisions are made?
Not for me, yeah. It's possible that whoever brought this up isn't here this evening.
Well, I did talk, I talked to Austin today about, you know, and his perspective, he thought it might, but it looks like there's 2 different people. So we at least had 2 comments, but anyway, but he thought that it might have alluded to the decision-making that was occurring around settling the faculty contract when March was still wrapping things up before Stephanie came. And there was I wasn't around, but I'm understanding something came up about a procedural piece about what the board would do in terms of setting parameters. And there was confusion. And I think it was clarified with an attorney, with the attorney, but I think he thought that it might have come up from that. So I just want to open it and see, are there lingering questions or concerns from any of you? And
So
What you got, Mike?
concerned about that issue and process. And I don't see, I don't know where you're at now. We haven't talked about this since then, but I remember you being quite concerned at the time.
Yeah, well, I don't wanna, belabor it too much.
okay,
I was new to the board last year, and I don't know if I was one. just
That's
to clear
okay.
But we're bringing the thing up, so I'm addressing it now.
sure.
That was an issue for me that, suggested that we weren't all at the table, when decisions were being made.
Okay.
It was, the basic pieces of it without getting too into the weeds and the
Right.
details.
Some of
Some
you wanted
authorization.
to be at a given meeting when some
Some
direct.
authorization given to the president,
Okay.
go back to the negotiations and do X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
Or up to X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And then it came back essentially what did X, Y, and Z and then some, and that's not what we authorized.
Okay.
Well, I got some direction from some pieces of members of the board that seemed to suggest
Okay.
that would be okay. So I went ahead and did it. It's too late now, but
I
that was
see.
the basic issue.
So that was the only issue I had heard about it. Austin did reference that. Yes, and then Mike has a comment.
Did you want to go first, Mike?
Well, I would just say that in my years of experience on the board, that situation was a bit of an anomaly, and I don't see us generally having difficulty with process about how we make decisions. I do think there was confusion around that particular issue
Okay.
instance, yeah.
Okay, that's a sense I'm getting, but I want to make sure. Because you don't want to, this is too important to leave unclear.
Yeah, so I'll just say a takeaway learning for me that came out of the situation. I was actually talking with you. So we had an executive session where the board provided direction to the president. And which is the board's correct role in that situation to provide direction to the president. We did that. We were not unanimous, but she felt like she had enough information to move forward, and she did. And then she got to a certain point in the process and wanted to go farther to conclude the process. She felt it was important, and she sent an email that asked if you're not okay with this, please contact the chair and let her know, and we'll set up an executive session. So
It was done in the negative.
yeah,
Yeah.
so then nobody contacted me. She and I discussed it and we moved forward, except, one person did
One
contact
person
me.
contacted the chair.
Not asking for an executive session, but saying that her expressing her opinion.
Good.
It came out later that Steve didn't have access to the email because he was in a remote location where he couldn't access it. I do know there were some board members that did speak with the president, but she felt that she had the support to move forward, and she did.
Got it.
And so the takeaway for me in that situation was that email was not a good way to process that. And you and I talked about that.
That's
Right.
really the only,
Yeah.
kind of a,
Yeah.
oh golly, how can we avoid this? Where it leaves these lingering kind of,
So this is really, I'm all ears to this, because I wasn't physically present, I wasn't monitoring the executive session where the original direction was given that was subsequently exceeded. But I did get the email, I read it, and I did nothing. I'm guilty of doing nothing. And so what I find myself thinking about is, in the time that Stephanie and I have been working together since she got here, one of the things that I've been very, very aware of is what are the issues Stephanie calls to my attention that really should go to the full board?
Mhm.
And what are the questions or issues that I can just disposition on my own?
Got it.
And there are a couple of times when I thought, you know, maybe that one should have gone to the full board. I don't really think there've been any, you probably don't either, but, and there have been a couple of times when I've said, I think you want to brief board members in your one-on-ones with them, you know, but this is a really, really important question. You're talking about sort of the dynamics of what will cause a board to lose confidence in their CEO or
one another.
create friction between board members.
Yes.
And going forward, what can we learn from that experience? You know, what do I need to think about the fact that, you know, I was invited to have an opinion and I chose not to express it. And maybe that wasn't the right way. You know, maybe we need in those kind of circumstances, especially when it's in the context of negotiation where you need to turn around the board will relatively quickly. Maybe we need to do more telephonic board meetings, which are absolutely legitimate if they're properly noticed. And it's a way for the president to gain access simultaneously to the full board, or, you know, now we have Zoom. It doesn't even have to be telephone, it can be Zoom.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now that we have a new president who is just sort of, bless her heart, feeling her way on every single issue, not even aware which ones are the landmines and which ones aren't, because there's no way to know where the bodies are buried when you haven't been there, you know. And Marge had already been here 5 years and nevertheless decided that, you know, based on that dynamic, that she felt she knew what to do. And it just blew up. I mean, it was bad. It was not good.
Worst of all, from an outside perspective, you know, coming in here, it's fairly fresh, even in July. You know, I guess I started talking with you maybe late June, early July. It erodes trust. It erodes trust among you, and certainly with the CEO. I mean, the fact that particular individual is no longer here changes that dynamic, but it just erodes trust in all around. So it's no, you know, everyone did what the best they could in the time. You know, we have to hold that and allow it, and we got to learn and say, okay, what can we do? So it sounds like it's less about, maybe I was gonna say, it's less about how the decisions are made and more about the communication.
I think it's also about transparency. And I think in the last meeting, Steve requested that Angela's questions that she's sending to the president to get responses from them be included in our minutes. And I thought that was a really great idea, because I agree that is not, I wouldn't call it deliberation, but it's access to information that we're basing our thinking on, right? And so I think in my conversation with you, I kind of had this aha moment, because you said to me, was it common to make decisions by email? And I was kind of like, was it? And I didn't really have an answer in that moment. But then when I started thinking back, I was like, wow, I don't know if we were. It was really more informational, but it made me think, right? And so that's not transparent, right? When we are doing that kind of process.
That's an unintentional shadow over your processes that you know, it wasn't trying to hide things, but it had that effect.
Right. So I really appreciate that Stephanie's information. It's very succinct, it's very factual, and you know, I just appreciate that more and more.
Good.
I just want to say this. So all that happened.
Yes.
It's like 5 months ago or something like that.
Right.
Everybody knows that you weren't there, but everybody else was there and listening in. I was extremely upset.
Right.
And I let everybody know. And I moved on. Like, I'm
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
I got good.
Okay.
We all have, yeah.
I appreciate that. And, you know, it's it's, you know, said lots of interesting things about what you just said, that you're very upset in the moment, but we can move,
Can I say something about that though?
please.
So I just can't help looking up here on the tablet though and say hold criticism for private one-on-one meetings, right? And I feel like what happened was that you came into the room with an incredible amount of upset and you targeted at specific people. And that's great that you moved on, but you moved on without acknowledging the potential impact that you may have had on people. And so when we talk about the type of culture that we want as a board, overall, I do think we do an incredible job of holding space for each other respectfully. So, but what happens when one of us does have something like that happen? You know, that had an impact on many of the people in the room. That had an impact on many of the women in the room. For you as a man to act in that way. So I'm making myself vulnerable here because it had an impact on me. And yes, we move on, but how do we move on? With what type of intention and acknowledgement of impact? Because there's intent and there's impact, and I think you understand that conversation around intent and impact, right?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. When we got to that list, I was thinking probably the same that you were thinking, like, well, that's not what happened 3 or 4 months ago.
Yes.
Right, and most people in the room are probably thinking that, well, okay. You know, it wasn't, for me, I let it go, and then when we were talking about it, is that a hard and fast rule? You never criticize, you know, in public, and so, and I didn't address it in the moment. I guess I don't entirely agree with that one, by the way. I felt like that was, I said I was ready to move on, but, and I mean that, but that particular thing that happened, and for me, was egregious. It was a fireable offense.
I understand.
So
I understand.
I felt manipulated, and I felt manipulated. I think there were people that knew exactly what they were doing and did what they did in order to get the particular result. As you said, you know, trust was lost that day.
Right.
And I have said, and I mean it, like, I'm ready to say, all right, that happened, we learned, we're moving on. But in that particular moment, I'm like, whoa, this is about
Your
as bad as
trust
it could
is
be.
very deeply broken. And what I really thank you, Lisa, for, you know, being courageous and saying it. And I want to also hold the space for where Steve is coming from.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, there's no saints and no sinners, you know, we're all owning this. What I think we all agree, the way it went down wasn't optimal. If we had it to do again, it would not have been like that. That we might have had the same outcome, but that process had some casualties. And there may well be people who have scars. I know I certainly haven't been a perfect anything, and I have lost it. I've tried really, really hard not to, but I have, and I know I have. And I know that I've had to apologize, go back and apologize when I lost it and say, you know, and even when I do, there's a scar that, you know, you always remember when someone has on you. You felt on in a different way. So I think our aiming for improvement here is, how could you have expressed your very valid feelings about feeling manipulated, feeling like the process wasn't appropriate, without it being so scarring? You know, it might be that's your work. There is a place for criticism in public. But you want to use, that's a very, very, very delicate tool, a very powerful tool. You don't take that one out of the toolbox very often. And how you use it should be so very respectful. Because look at who all hears it, look at the ripple effects beyond just that individual. In terms of culture that you're setting. I mean, it would have to be something like, I statement, I have to say that what has transpired makes me feel X. I have, you couch it in those kinds of I statements. You can be clear if you're calm and clear about this doesn't feel right to me because of why. So that it's not blaming, shaming. But it's hard in the moment because you felt, I get the sense, Steve, I understand how you felt. Because it was like, what? Not your expectation. You felt blindsided. You felt like process wasn't followed is what I'm understanding, if I may. So stepping back, yes, Rosie.
I'm the person who suggested that one. Holly was kind enough to agree with it. And put it up
What was
there.
your thinking on that, Holly?
Can I finish?
Oh, excuse
me. I put it up there because that experience over the contract was not the first time. There have been instances in the last year or 2 or 4 when board members have been fairly harsh in feedback past the president onto administrative leaders in the organization, to the point where the previous president at a previous retreat talked with the board candidly about the fact that her cabinet did not feel supported by the board. And that she felt like she was sticking her neck out to share with the board the fact that her own leadership team was feeling like the board did not have their backs when they were attempting to do their work. And so my purpose in putting that up is I think about it. I agree that there is a legitimate role for board members to be able to express their reaction to proposals by the president and administration or to events that have transpired on campus or whatever. I mean, that has to be a legitimate part, and I agree with you, Steve, to that extent. I just also think that as I reflect on past board meetings where I have seen, and I've been guilty of it, I'm including myself in this. This is a learning for me as well, that when we didn't get the PERS bond proposal when we should have gotten it a year, 18 months earlier than we got it, when interest rates were reliably on the floor, as opposed to when we were anxious we were going to lose a really important opportunity for the college. I mean, there have been times when we have been blunt spoken in board meetings about our reaction. I don't know if we don't take the time to consider what may have caused things to unfold the way they did. It's irrelevant. I just want to treat the president and the people who come before the board the same way I would have treated an employee at work. I wouldn't take them to task in front of their peers in a staff meeting. I would take them behind closed doors and say, that can be done better. And here's how it needs to work better.
Got it.
And I do think the board had a legitimate beef with the whole contract, the way that whole thing unfolded, and I understand better from your explanation about how that went down the way it did. And it's just a happenstance that we didn't have to deal with it. But this is a good conversation to have. I don't mean for you, Steve, to never be in a position to give your honest review of something that administration or others bring before the board. If we could just try to be mindful of what that public setting means for those people who have to be brave enough to bring forward the items that they bring forward, then, you know, we'll be more successful in the long run, I think,
Thank
is
you.
kind of where I'm coming
No,
from
that
on all that.
I think I'm feeling a lot of resonance and understanding, and I'm glad that we brought that up because it's an ideal and it's more of a how.
Yeah.
The how is
Yeah.
matters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I do want, thank you, and I do want to invite your voice, Holly, since nothing else. I just want to make sure. I remember, you know, coaching my team, and I'm coaching myself when I would say it. I would say to them, we don't get the luxury of having a bad day. As the leaders in the institution, we can't have a bad day. I can't go around and be grumpy and upset and, you know, I've got 1,000 things and, you know, trustee just yelled at me, that's going down, and somebody, I have to hold that because I'm setting the tone and culture, the values of the institution. I have to deal with it in another way. Yes.
I think it's helpful when we're reflecting on our behaviors and our experiences. In my job, we have sprint retrospectives. And so after the end of a 2-week period of work, we reflect on how that sprint, that 2 weeks went. And the first thing we always do is say what went well. Because once you go negative, you never go positive again.
And that's what we remember, the human brain attaches to it.
Yeah, so I just want to just say that a couple of things that I think that we do really, really well. Despite, there are comments and there are phrasing that is not great to staff and to our president. But in general, we really appreciate and thank the folks who are presenting to us. I think that we all try to remember that a lot of work went into whatever is coming to us. And that people are, in addition, putting themselves out there on camera, being recorded and put it on YouTube to all 3 of our watchers. No, but people are really putting themselves out there and they've done a ton of work to show up to these meetings. And I think that we make a point to appreciate that. And I think that's really important. And I also think that, as evidenced by a lot of the conversation tonight, we firmly understand and practice the concept of supporting whatever decision has been made by the board, regardless of our personal feelings going into it, and regardless of our vote going into it.
That's
I think we're doing a good job of that.
Thank you.
I agree with that. That's something we're really solid as a board.
I like that sprint retrospective. That's a neat idea. That's very interesting. I was going somewhere and I lost it. No, what you said was way better. It was much more helpful. It probably wasn't important. So, how decisions are made sounds like, you know, you have your clarity of expectations. The some lessons learned from that, whatever we would call that, stumble, fumble, whatever. Kerfuffle. Yeah, but I mean, and it's bigger for some. I don't want to minimize it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I also want to honor how much, you know, why it happens, you know, why you may speak more sharply, or because you have a lot on your shoulders. I want to honor the weight of, because you take your job very seriously as trustees. And I'm imagining in that case, you felt like I can't do my job. This isn't right. You know, feeling there's a responsibility when the interest rates, you're like, we're missing because for the good of the. So I get it. You're human and you'll have your sprint retrospectives and continue to get better.
I need to take a body break.
Oh, that's, it's a perfect time. Let's do it. Everybody take a few minutes.
Okay, great.
Thank you for raising that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Where's the rest?
Oh, it's right down and to the left. Yay. Good work.
You may feel like you want to be able to criticize, but you are one of the ones who's the best at praising people for what they bring to board meetings, Steve. I mean, I watch you do it every single meeting.
Yeah.
So I'm not, yeah.
What's for a second? Oh, I love it. Coconut.
There, yes. They were in Whole Foods. And they were in Costco too, about the most beautiful.
I was going to like ever been in there.
They're in Costco as well.
And then I last year.
No, I don't need more of you. Wow.
How you doing? How's your daughter back there in the pool?
Okay.
Yeah, how's your mom though?
Today.
Oh my gosh, happy your birthday and you're not there. Oh, that's hard.
I think I was like extra in the day today, just naturally like 2 hours before my alarm.
You know, my kids are, you heard how old they are, 40 and 38, and I still get all, you know, misty when it's their birthday. I want to call them first thing in the morning and sing happy birthday to them and, yeah. Yeah.
It's still singing for me. I know it's only been a week that I've been.
Bless your heart. It's a big, this is her first time away, right? Oh, God. It's a first for you both? Wow. Wow.
I'm very excited.
Yeah.
It's very happy.
Does she know what she wants to study?
You can play with scientists, which is there.
Any ideas?
I'm very intrigued. Oh, you going to college stories that I'm hearing.
And what was the reason?
I'm in the language and deep. Writing.
Although I did all of those for
Yes.
a different cat.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yes.
We're inspired.
I never left. I was right here. Oh, I'm so lucky. I am lucky. And you know, my old Elaine was that's what that's like. He did the math media program and I just forgot. He did media production at a television show and for the 4 years until the pandemic happened and he got laid off like everybody else. And then he went over to a company called Regulatory and he's doing all the media production for that company. It's different. Yeah. And my youngest, I supervisor. Yeah. Over there. Getting some of the rural or maybe like the metro area companies. Say they're having any problems, and we have to, for the recall election, and it's a big deal in the community, but it's not. But that is like really small. Yeah, was disgusted with. Oh, yeah.
We're almost back.
Is that, I need to change this,
Yeah.
because I think it's outside of the dust.
Yeah, yeah.
But there were unregistered out there, like in towns.
Someone running. And
See?
it's vision, when they-
I don't know how long it is, but. Oh,
Oh, you have
Yeah, yeah, so my cable part.
check it,
Yeah.
smoke in the air,
Yeah,
notice?
no, not today because I didn't go out of the house today, but when I came out to campus, I didn't see it or smell it.
But I can still smell it.
Could you? Yeah.
I'm sure.
I thought it rained.
Yeah, the rain got your house. And certainly. Okay, we'll get going so we can get you home. I actually have a. The reason. They don't.
Exactly, or something like these are. Yes, I wonder if you too.
Often experiencing PTSD.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, now-
Oh, that's too funny.
But I guess like,
That's too funny.
Well, it seems. You're not around.
are you ready?
I know, that's it.
Okay.
We have fun.
That's very advanced. No, it might go one extreme or the other. It's my match. When it might be, it was like my. Yes.
I'll text him.
My keister.
My keister.
This is being recorded, guys.
This is what happens at 8 o'clock.
I know. We're getting silly. We're getting silly. Okay. We're moving into the last section. Before. Executive. You're doing great. We're going to talk now about this. If you're looking on that same sheet with the trustee topics, this expectations for board norms and behaviors. We want to have a conversation about these. All kind of go in the same category, not the same as before, but we touched on them a little bit. Issues were raised, several people talked about what if, there's disagreements or there's kind of an atmosphere about what do you want, what is your expectation collectively about how information, they're really talking about mostly within board meetings, but there may be some other aspects I'm missing here. How information is shared, receiving last minute information, sending text during board meetings. Information is presented to the board that conflicts with the information provided by administration, requests from union leadership or others in the college community. That last one sounds like it's a little bit of a different issue. So I want to focus on the 4 bullets before that, all talk about, to me, about information coming to the board from different perspectives, and some of it in real time in the middle of the board meeting. Thoughts, discussion, expectations.
So I don't think it's the board's responsibility to arbiter between information provided us by administration and information provided us by other stakeholder groups.
Okay.
I think we have one employee and our expectation should be that the process by which information is developed for the board is inclusive and factual, and that we trust the process by which information presented to the board by administration has been prepared, we trust the process, and therefore, this business of we have our own set of facts. It is just counterproductive. I don't think that's the board's job. I think the board's job is to have an expectation of the president that the information presented to the board has been generated by a process that the board can have confidence in and faith in, and that is the information the board will weigh and measure when making decisions.
Thank you.
That's my personal perspective.
Other thoughts? Reactions?
We have what seems to me to be kind of unequal treatment of different groups on campus with respect to information delivered to the board. Our expectation and standard procedure for the year and a half I've been on the board are that any information that the board is expected to consider in its upcoming meeting has to be submitted by such and such a time. It's usually close to a week, but not exactly a week, maybe 5 days ahead of the upcoming meeting. And the reason is just so that board members have that much time to review stuff ahead of time is the basic thing. And that makes sense. And we certainly, all the staff, of course, are adhere to that, right? There are occasionally, times when they catch a mistake or whatever it is,
Sure.
then an email goes out and says, this has been modified or updated or whatever. So that does happen, of course. But we don't hold the unions or other, well, primarily the unions to that same standard. It's and I don't think it's fair or respectful to the administration, because not only are the board sort of caught off guard by whatever that happens to be, it sort of drops right there at the head of the meeting, or often it's a lot of times during the meeting. Our president or their staff are sort of equally kind of going through the stuff right then and there, and often sort of feeling that we find afterwards like this isn't exactly right, or maybe it's right, but it's missing context, and there's no real opportunity right then and there to address it. So for me, it's a standards issue. We should hold everybody to the same expectation. If you're going to submit information for the boards that's going to be deliberated or discussed at a board meeting, it has to be delivered within that everybody, it has to be held to that time frame. Otherwise, it should just be held off until the following meeting before we would have any discussion about it.
Thank you. I see Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Rosie's statement about we need to trust our administration. And I agree with Steve's statement about material presented to the board should be presented in advance. At the same time, we have a public, an opportunity for public comment, and we can't control what comes at public comment and mandate that be provided to us in advance. I think that maybe what we can do is to say that, and I think we often do this. I think Lisa did it almost every time she moderated over public comment, to state that we don't, we may or may not immediately respond to public comment that is presented to the board. And maybe we need to continue to say that. And maybe we just need to be more diligent about saying that this information is interesting, and someone will get back to you, but it may not be tonight. So I don't think we can cut off sort of impromptu or short notice comments from the public, no matter who they are. At the same time, we need to be very clear that information we get on the night before, or the night of making a decision that's new information to us, may or may not be able to be brought in under consideration prior to that decision. simply because we haven't had time to weigh it and to vet it and to have the administration comment on it.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Lisa.
So I'm just really struck by principle number 2. Represent the common good.
Mm-hmm.
And it says community college trustees are elected to represent interests of their stakeholder communities. The role of each trustee and the board as a whole is to balance the needs and interests of the community at large when developing and considering college policies. And so as an elected official, I feel that we have a balancing act, right? We have the expertise and the work of our CEO and her staff, but we also have the common good that we represent. And we are elected by stakeholders. And I feel it is my responsibility to have an authentic relationship with those stakeholders, and that they have a right to address their interests to me. And I have a responsibility to weigh them and to consider them with the goals of the institution. And so I'm just really I was really struck by that particular piece when I read the 9 principles. And I think it's relevant to this conversation.
So
Right.
it's the issue, you've been having members of the community come in and at the last
I
minute?
think predominantly is probably communication from our unions. Through the budget process, in the spring, or when one thing or other. I don't think there's anything at all to prevent or inappropriate about faculty members or union leadership addressing the board in comments from the community or at the end of the meeting when they do their report. What I particularly cannot do successfully is process alternative facts 24 hours before the board is expected to make a decision about it. And I just feel it's not unreasonable for a policy body to have sort of an operating mutual agreement that it will absolutely be interested in alternative perspectives about things if they're provided in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and I was trying to understand this a little bit, so I plowed through your policies and procedures, and I don't have them at my fingertips, but I will say that I saw in your policies, it says very specifically, you know, the comment that you were making, Lisa, and I'm sure you know, because you've done a lot of policy work, that of course you have public comment, but you don't respond to public comment based on your, I mean, it says it very clearly. I don't know if you have set time limits.
Yeah.
And is the problem that it's not public comment, they come and then are distributing data,
They are.
distributing.
In our July retreat, I remember Holly saying that she was getting texts from stakeholders during meetings.
In the middle.
That's in,
Yeah,
which
well,
is not on Holly, it's inappropriate.
well, you can't tell people not to call and write and text. I mean, you can not answer them.
We can have some mutual agreements with each other that that's not a form of communication that we.
You know, I want to go back if I may, because this is helpful for me to do issue identification. And then I want to flesh this out just a little bit more, because there's 2 places. And one has about the common good that you were mentioning. I want to dig into that. But the other has to do with trusting, you know, you were saying, Rosie, trusting that what's brought to us is done properly. Where is your shared governance process?
I don't understand the question.
Okay,
Where is it? What is it?
what I mean is where my experience is, and you know, turn to Stephen, is that critical documents that are electric, you know, they're gonna have constituent interests, because we're talking internal community, we're not talking the external voting community. You're talking the internal college community is where the issue seems to be. And so the common good piece to me is about the external voting community, but of which this is a subset, but isn't the common good. The common good is everything. So that's why I got a little confused about that. We'll go there in a minute. But if it's a major decision that the board is being asked to make on a policy or a budget, which is a policy, it's gone through the internal shared governance process. Constituents have had voice all along the way, right?
That's my understanding. So there is a college council, there's a shared governance structure at Lake Community College. And so it consists of the college council, and then there's a subcommittee of the college council, that's a budget subcommittee. But there are other councils, faculty council, infrastructure council, diversity council.
And they all flow up to your apex council that is gives advice to you to draw whatever you bring forth. Now, it doesn't mean that all the constituents are gonna agree even through the shared governance process. So and I've experienced this, we're not naive, where even though it's gone through shared governance, I can have constituent groups that will say, yeah, we had a voice, we got overruled, and so I want you to hear. That can happen too, that's normal. But I think it's real critical that trustees know and understand this shared governance process. You need to understand, if you don't, I don't know if you do or not, what's going on if you're not all fully versed in who's on it, how it works, the depth of, I'm assuming it's working at the depth that we were accustomed to in California. I can't imagine. You don't know yet, but you're gonna find out.
Happen in October.
So you'll experience this and then inform the board needs to know
That might be.
how well this shared governance processes work. Because part of your job, I saw it in the policies, is to make sure that we call it participatory governance, you're calling it shared governance here, I think, that your shared governance process is good and effective. So to me, it's preventative. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to make everyone happy all the time. But the better your procedure is, the more trustworthy, the more trust you'll have in what's coming to you. You'll have better discernment about when an alternative view, you can say, well, what did budget council say about that? How did that work through these processes?
So are you saying that when we're presented with an alternative point of view, that's an internal stakeholder group, that the board's question should be, what was the process? What was the process, President Bulger, that was used to reach this recommendation, and where did this stakeholder group have the opportunity to be heard?
Yeah.
And in other words, we should be asking questions about the process.
Yeah. And know, the more you know in advance, then you won't have to, unflesh the whole thing every single time. But yeah,
It's been
you want to trust the process as well as your designated employee and her administration. It's not, you don't just say, this is a good report because we like Stephanie and we know she does a good job. That's character attribution. That may all be true. And might go.
So Cindy, to flesh it out just a little bit more, what we've experienced is that on the night when the board is scheduled to make a decision, the administration has presented information to the board, and the board will get either verbal and or in writing information that is quite different from the information that has been presented by the administration.
I see.
And at that point, none of us as board members are inclined to point to the president and say, tell us where this information is wrong, or
Yeah,
reconcile this difference.
yeah, they don't have time.
That's the problem.
Got
I
it.
think.
Got it, okay. I mean, that's the classic sticking the bar in the spokes of the bicycle to stop it from turning. We get it, but again, the more that you can unwind this before, it's not gonna say that won't happen, but the more you can have trust and early knowledge and trust about how these things are being bought. And it's gonna take, you're gonna have to go through some cycles with your new president. She's gonna have to understand, she may have advice on strengthening the shared governance process.
Well, it's been under construction pretty much the whole time Marge
Mhm.
was president of the college. I mean, from my perspective, it was flawed, broken. I don't know what the right way to say it is, but we had some experiences prior to Marge's administration where the shared governance process should have been more productive than it was.
I see.
And so when
I
Marge
see.
came, she convened what felt like a really pretty massive grassroots process to figure out what worked, what didn't work, how to, and they came up with recommendations and they came to the board and told us about the
Oh, wow.
recommendations.
So then-
I know what this, to Lisa's point, I don't know what the status of it is
Okay,
right
That's
now,
a
or
very
maybe
good
we
question.
should schedule a briefing about it.
it's an area that I think should be investigated.
Well, but I do remember from reading our accreditation report that we were actually recognized for having a very good
Oh,
shared governance.
It was not
When was that,
for a long
Lisa?
time.
When was that?
That was last year.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and as well as our budget process.
That's good.
Like our creditors
That's good.
called out.
Okay,
those
that's a
things.
third party
Yeah,
validation.
Right.
It doesn't tell you everything, but that's good.
But I don't know,
But you ought to know.
I have a
what it
very
is.
basic understanding of what it
Okay.
is. So I could benefit from learning more.
Awesome.
Yes.
Rather than try to, cast shade on any particular behavior, that's normal constituent work. Go to root cause, go to what is it gonna take for you to trust what's coming to you? What questions do you need to ask about it? And then there will always be, what are you gonna do with last minute information or texts that come or, people, it's normal. If it's a critical decision, there's gonna be lobbying. Yeah, that's normal.
Yeah.
And do you think we should also be asking the question, so you're asking, what do we need to understand or know to have confidence in the shared governance process? But does it also make sense to ask, like, what does it mean for the stakeholders in the institution to have confidence in the shared governance process?
That absolutely, that's a part of it. I will say, that there are circumstances in which if people don't like the outcome, they damn the methodology. That's another common human practice. Just saying. So check in on that when there's nothing contentious going on. Don't do it in the middle of bargaining. Do it, get your processes ready in advance. Strengthen, understand as much as possible. It won't be perfect, but I think that'll put you in a stronger place where you won't feel battered about, and I don't know what to think, I don't know what to trust, and I have to make this critical decision.
As an example, different kind of an example, so in February, March, somewhere in there, this past February, March, a handful of program reviews happened. Led by the provost, but sanctioned, authorized by the president, right?
Sure.
So he was acting in her, stead. She was right there. Anyways, so hey, I recommend after thorough process, all the rest, that we change these programs, eliminate these ones, et cetera, without going through the details.
Sure.
And and it was ultimately the board's and it was a decision for the board to endorse or not.
Yeah,
And
it's tough.
Yeah, you know, and those things are always tough because there's winners and losers in those situations, and so no matter what, the losers never feel like they were adequately heard. I mean, we know that. Whether, you know, so this is just a general comment. There was a lot of second guessing by the board, and I'm not, you know, I ask questions too, so I'm not saying that I'm right and there are other people wrong. This is not that kind of a comment, but a lot of second guessing of the board, by the board of the provost. Well, did you do this and did you do that? And I think, you know, I talked to constituents out in the community and they really value this program. I think we ought to keep it, you know, whatever, that kind of discussion. And there's value in those discussions for sure. And anyways, we endorsed some of the proposals. We shot down some others too.
Right.
You know, and so I guess really what I'm doing is asking you about, you know, our what you might recommend, you know, in terms of best practice going forward. When I reflect on that a little bit, I think, you know, I think our job was probably more to ask questions like that you were just suggesting. What was the process that you went through? How did you, you know, who did you consult? Who was not at the table? Those that are affected, did they have a chance to appeal? You know, questions like
Really
this.
make sure that's clear.
And our job was, did you do all of that? And if you if you did, and we don't have any reason to doubt your, you know, your ability to carry those things through. I think at this point, our job is to say we support your decision. It's a tough decision. We're not, you know, always happy about it. We see that there's people who are affected by it.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
that's what I think at this point. I don't think we quite did that.
You're not quite there. Mike has all the answers.
Yeah, well, not exactly.
Thank you.
Cindy, I've been reflecting on your comments, and it seems to me like a synthesis of what you said is to remind ourselves as board members that our jobs are hard. We have to make hard decisions. To recognize that our decisions are going to be unpopular with some people, and to sort of accept that and have confidence that without second guessing ourselves and the administration, that we do the best we can with what we have and move forward. I mean, that's kind of a takeaway that I'm hearing from you. And I think that your suggestion about taking a look at the process, looking at it during a time that's not sensitive or where there's something controversial going on is a good idea. But to say to ourselves, yeah, our jobs are hard. We're not going to be able to make decisions to make everyone happy. We want to do the best we can to ensure that we are being inclusive in our decision making, and at the same time to absorb the fact that we may have to make a decision that's going to be unpopular with some people.
Thank you, Mike. I would maybe go even one step further. Get very clear on a set of decision criteria. You know, get very clear on your North Star. And you are, but make it explicit. Always ask whenever there is a tough decision like this, what difference does this make for students and student success? Try to take it there. I mean, not everything fits in that box, but you're you know, what is the implication for what you're here mostly for? You know, the most important thing you're here for. And try, you know, if that gives you any discernment in the circumstance, try to take it there. And I only hesitate a little because it sounded almost like, oh yeah, you're gonna make tough decisions, winners, losers. You care, you never stop caring, never stop angsting over it.
I do think Dr. Bolger has an incredible opportunity, particularly with this board, because over the time frame of Marge's presidency, she started down this road, but then the pandemic hit and everything just kind of went crazy.
Yeah.
She was no longer having a lot of one-on-one meetings with board members. And the prior administration to Marge Mary Spildy was just relentless about meeting one-on-one with board members every single month to review the agenda. Here are the issues that are on your agenda. These are the questions you're gonna be facing, and, you know, here are the ramifications. What are your questions? You know, what do you need to know to be able to make a decision on this? And that was a golden opportunity, in my humble opinion, to get out all the information that the president would need to ultimately not be second guessed when finally bringing forward a recommendation to the board at a board meeting and expecting a decision out of the board. It seems like the second guessing is going to be even more likely when you didn't get a chance to ask those questions before this meeting. So your only opportunity is to ask them right now in this meeting, and it's just going to make, you know, if we spend every single meeting appearing to second guess the administration, you know, I personally grow pretty weary serving that body.
Right. At the same time, I couldn't agree more, Elizabeth. At the same time, you can't be just a get along, go on.
I get that.
And I know that's not what you're suggesting, the rubber stamp board. You do need to ask good critical questions. And I know the practice is there, I'm sure you're doing it, Stephanie, but it's also, I'll remind you, it's in a board, somewhere in one of your board policies says that if information is requested from one of the trustees, maybe in a list, it's shared with all. And the public needs to know that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's important to ask some of these questions that you might have had the chance to ask independently. Make sure, because the constituents need to trust that you've done your due diligence too.
Angela is really good about it.
Yeah. It's yeah. Did you solve this problem? I think you did some really good work on this one. I think it's one that's raised top of mind. I'll give you a synopsis because where you're landing, what I would say, because I don't want you to wear out on me before we get to phase 3. We got to get there. These are so important. You're doing really, really well. From these meaty discussions that you've had about, you're talking about what you're expecting of yourselves and of one another for board behavior. I'm going to distill this. Is there anyone willing to provide a synopsis? You know, anything that synthesize out of what you just said as it pertains to board decision making or this expectation for information and how you're dealing with multiple streams of information for decision making. You want to, anybody got a brain for that? And you want me to go back over this and synopsize it and give it back to you to reflect on? Yes.
I think I heard 2 action items.
Oh, I love you.
The first one is training and sort of improving our general understanding as board members of the shared governance structure.
Good.
The
Yes.
second one is the things that are questions that occur in writing in advance and responses that occur in writing in advance going to the board packet or into the board docs.
Into the notes
that I
or the minutes, whatever. So it's codified.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
So
Okay.
just saving that all together. Those are the
Nice.
2 sort of action items that I've heard. And then generally, I think I heard a discussion of understanding, I think Lisa said it really well, that our role requires balance. And I think you also said something about not losing that angst that,
Yeah.
you know, this will.
Yeah,
be
you don't take it
difficult,
lightly.
and we know that it will be difficult. It continues to be difficult. But improving our understanding of things, improving our understanding of how the process works before we get to these really difficult points to improve our ability to deal with these times.
Well said. That feels, yeah, I know, that feels good. Okay. Thank you. Anything else that you would want to add to mutual expectations for your norms and behaviors. Is there anything else that's bubbled up? Anything is, yes,
And there's continuing to talk a bunch. I would say that the two things that we do really well, we should keep doing. We should keep letting folks know that we appreciate the work that they're bringing to us and that they've done a great job, and we really appreciate that bravery and coming up and talking to us, and continue supporting decisions that we've made as a board after the decisions are made, regardless of our personal votes or feelings and everything.
thank you. Thank you.
So I have one.
Yes,
And I have recently had a conversation with Austin about this, and that is, he felt, I don't know if I'm putting words in his mouth, but my impression was he had the sense that he was a little fuzzy on what is the way for board members to get items on a board agenda. And he said his understanding, and in fact, it is articulated in our board policies that a board member can reach out to the president, I'm sorry, the chair or vice chair or both, and talk to them about getting an item on the agenda. And I said, well, we have kind of an operating procedure that there's a time during the board meeting when you can, as a board member, say, I have an interest in ABC, and I would be interested in a presentation or work session or whatever it is. And that's not a policy. That's just kind of it's been a long-standing operating procedure of the board. And the intention there is to give other board members the opportunity to be unenthusiastic about it. Which is to say, rather than having seven different people giving direction to the president about what needs to be on the board agenda, you have to come to your colleagues in the group setting and put it out there so the colleagues can say, that is really a great idea and we should do that, or that's a shining object we don't want to chase after right now.
right.
You know, appreciate your interest in that, but it's not something we want to chase after right now.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would, as your chair, I would like to ask for support from the board colleagues that we continue to use that approach. And there, we have purposefully put an item at the end of every board meeting agenda where board members will have the opportunity to say, I'm interested in ABC. So
How
the
is
rest
that
of it,
agendized, Rosie? How is that item agendized?
it's at the bottom of the agenda, board member questions and comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll make a point of saying this is the time, if there's something on your mind,
Okay,
to bring it up. Just to make sure board members remember that that's their opportunity, but I want us to action what we've said tonight about not chasing after shiny objects and staying focused and supporting those three goals and working on those things. But I also want every board member to feel like they get a fair hearing.
and so we're gonna practice what you're proposing by, I want to get a consensus or, you know, kind of a, do you have general support for what Rosie's recommending to continue this process of, this is how an individual board member can bring things forward? And what I'm understanding, what this means is one of you would raise it in that period, and then you would have, a majority of you would have to say yes for it to be
To actually get on the agenda.
to be moved.
So, I don't know if that's in alignment with Robert's rules, actually, that, in
How so?
Robert's rules, there's something about, if a board adopts a practice that it's usually not a majority of the board to approve to get something on the agenda, because Robert's rules is designed to protect the minority voice. And so boards that have a practice like that, they usually use, you know, like ours would be 3 out of 4 rather than 3 out of 7 rather than 4 out of 7. I know the 4J board they use that as a practice. And so that's one
Okay.
thing I'm thinking of, but the other thing is, and it might be gone now.
And Mike has.
Oh, I do know we have language in a policy about this. I don't know it verbatim, but it's like people can't propose something that is like out of the ordinary use of resources with the college or something like that, so.
Okay, thank you. And I want to hear Mike and then we'll come back to a solution on this. Go ahead, Mike.
So I've obviously seen the item on the agenda, the future board agenda items. I never thought that was there for some the board voting on whether or not to place the item on the agenda. I thought that was soliciting future board agenda items. My opinion is that any board member should be able to put something on the agenda if they want to do that. And it can be quickly voted down by the board if the board disagrees with it when it comes up. But I think any board member should have the ability to place an item on the agenda, and you know, the chair will manage the meeting in such a way that to make sure that we don't get sidetracked on a 2-hour discussion on something the board doesn't really want to talk about.
So if I'm understanding you, Mike, what you're saying is you would recommend that anyone be able to put it on the agenda and then at the point in the next meeting, when that agenda item comes up, the board would attest to whether or not and have the discussion at that point about whether if you would move forward with that item
Well, I mean, a quick way.
or that recommendation, whatever.
A quick way to do that would be for the board member to make a motion, and the motion either gets voted up or down.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. And then Angela.
I like Lisa's suggestion, and I totally agree with it. There's the idea of things only getting on an agenda that had majority support seems a little severe. I agree that, you know,
Okay.
3 out of 7, if that's the right number anyways, makes sense.
Okay,
I guess I don't, you know, Mike and I may not disagree if we like work through all the details, but my concern is that if a single person says, I would like to blah, 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 be on the agenda, that item may require a lot of staff, you know,
That's my concern.
work. So if it's.
that's my concern too.
So that's to me is where the board, you know, at least 3 out of 7 have to say, yeah, it's okay to direct, you know, Stephanie to direct staff to dedicate X amount of staff resources or whatever it is.
Just to even deal with the topic.
So that's my concern, because you know, we all have wild, crazy ideas once in a while that don't deserve any follow-up. So, you know, I think there should be some kind of check-in.
Thank you, Steve. And I think Angela, you had something.
That was what I was gonna say. I was looking at, I'm pretty sure we have a policy on the subject, but I don't wanna see us get into a situation where a single individual of the board can direct a lot of staff resources.
You do have a statement that says an individual of the board cannot. It says that very clearly somewhere in there. It can't direct staff to do something or, you know, give a report, you know, it needs to be some preponderance. I don't know exactly what language, whether it says majority or, you know, your Roberts thing. Okay, so calibrating, coming back. It sounds like I'm feeling more of a consensus around what you were describing as Roberts saying it needs to be more than one, but respecting that a minority position could be
That's just my experience.
voiced.
That's experience.
It's been your experience.
I'm curious what Mike has to say.
And Mike, how would you feel about that?
I can live with that. I can, the 3.
Okay, and it's gonna be circumstantial, won't it? You know, and if it's something that someone feels very strongly about, they'll pester you.
Well, as board members can differentiate, like they'll see like, oh, this
Yeah.
item is, that so-and-so is requesting it does not require a lot of staff time or so what the heck, we might as well, you know, we would honor that because, you
Yeah.
know, because we're trying to build our relationships all the time.
Okay,
So, you know, I think people will kind of have a sense like, wow, that seems like a big lift. We better be serious about
Okay.
this, or no, it doesn't, and it's fine.
okay. How's everybody? Are we in accord? Did we land okay?
I think so.
I mean, you can practice it. It is a practice, not a and you can modify it if it's not working well,
Yes.
but monitor and adjust, monitor and adjust. Okay, sounds good. And I will say, I don't want to forget, because I got Austin's feedback as we're going along. And on the board decision making, he did talk about having raised that question, how can, because he has a particular issue that he's interested in right now. That he wants to bring, and so there's a pathway for that to happen now. And on the board norms and behaviors, he was very, I think he shared a number of your comments about is the constituency should be able to contact trustees, you know, that's open, they should, you know, but he was the one that planted this question that I raised about the shared governance. We really need to rely on the shared governance process. I want to give him, I want to give the attribution that he was the one that brought that up when we talked this morning. So, okay.
Thank you so much for taking the time to bring him.
Oh, he really was distressed not to be here. And he spent over an hour just going over all this with me, so. Yay, okay,
One last thing on that
Yes.
topic.
please.
I think it's totally reasonable for a board member to, you know, first daylight their, whatever the issue is with the board pres and vice pres and say, you know, I'm thinking about bringing this up at the next meeting or something like that.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, that's where it needs to land. But,
Absolutely.
you know, but I wanted to, you know, share it with
Say it.
somebody first.
Absolutely.
So like for somebody to do that, and then ultimately the press to say, well, you know,
Think about this, think about what.
think about this and that if you really want to pursue, that's
That's
where
why
you'll
you
have to
choose.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, and we got a thumbs up from Mike. Okay, awesome. Okay. Think you did it. Thank you, Angela, for helping with synopsis. No, that's really going to be helpful when we're going back through and capturing this, because this will, like I'm gonna keep saying, it's gonna should roll into your evaluation that you do when you rebuild one that you like better next year. Anything else good of order for public? Because I think you've done this work from my perspective, and you've done really good work. Yes, Mike.
It feels to me like there's a little bit of a loose end out there about the board self-evaluation instrument.
Yes.
And maybe I should just leave that for Rosie and Steve to figure out, but.
You mean that who's gonna do it, how that?
To assign, I heard that's what he said, who we should assign it to.
I volunteered.
Oh, perfect.
And I'll volunteer also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a work subcommittee willing to work on it. And like I said, I'm happy to give you whatever feedback I can along the way. You know, you drug me into your family, I can't help it.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Take a quick break. We'll go to executive session. Good work.
So we need to extinguish any public.
My understanding is we say, you do it, thank you, thank you, thank you.